Welcome. I am Brian Berletic. Joining me is Angelo Giuliano, and we are covering live these US-backed protests in Bangkok, Thailand. So this was supposed to be a big protest planned for this Sunday. They've been talking about it all week. And so we're going to talk about who some of these groups are. We're going to talk about why is the US backing this mob driving around in the city during COVID-19 lockdown. Why are they doing that? What is the purpose of that? So we're going to talk about all of that. We just saw Wevo, a truck that said Wevo on the back. This is the violent so-called guards for the protests, and they're these ultra-violent vocational students that were recruited into the mob. And these are the groups that come out at night to fight violently with the police. And before they started doing this, there's a long history in Bangkok of these vocational schools, some of them engaging in this very violent competition and rivalry out on the streets. And they use machetes, guns, and they do kill each other. And so now they've brought this level of violence to the protests and their fight with the police. And this is just a replica of what we've seen in so many other US-backed protests, mobs, riots all around the globe. Angelo, for people joining us who don't really know who I am or who Angelo is, Angelo was in Hong Kong during the US-backed mobs there. So he has a lot of experience dealing with this, going through the whole process. The same kind of hopeless feeling, Angelo, you said you had during the mob before China finally got control of the situation. I think a lot of people in Bangkok feel that way when especially this mob is being led by Natawut, who in 2010 led the redshirt mobs of Thaksin Shinawatra, this US-backed billionaire. This was the sock puppet of choice they wanted to put into power in Thailand. And they burned the city down and they killed a whole bunch of people. They brought in armed militants with war weapons to fight with police and soldiers in Bangkok in 2010. And he is the one leading this protest today that we're watching live. Angelo, any opening thoughts? This is not the first time we've done this.
No, but I think it's important just to keep on repeating what is behind this. Again, there's always a geopolitical agenda here, which goes beyond Thai politics. These red shirt movements and the Thanaton movements in Thailand, they are US-backed, US-funded, and they're part of the Military Alliance. What is the Military Alliance? Is a united front against China, which encompasses Taiwan, India, Malaysia, Thailand, Myanmar as well, and they have all the same sign. It's a three finger signs, and it's so they're combining forces against China. So it's very interesting. They are coming out in the streets and being part of Military Alliance, and they're claiming that they are fighting for more socialism in Thailand and so on, but it's full of contradictions. First of all, it loses complete legitimacy when it's backed and funded by the US. It loses complete legitimacy. Moreover, they are backed by two billionaires, and billionaires. One of them is escaped justice. He was supposed to be in jail for corruption cases, and he's actually right now, I think, in Dubai.
Yes.
And the other one is also a billionaire. And again, they have their hands in the media. I just check. Kausod, just confirm with me. Kausod is part of the Thanaton family, right?
Yes, his mother is a major shareholder in Matichon, which is the parent company of Khalsa in Khalsa English.
And I just checked on Facebook. There are 14 million followers. I mean, it's massive. Again, you get your hands on media, you control the mind of people. And this is what is happening here, is that those billionaires have their hands on media. So here we are bringing an alternative views. And it's not about taking sides here. It's just exposing the funding the agenda, and also the geopolitics behind this. It's about a U.S. proxy war of containing China. So they're just being used, and it's very so it's important just to give the whole context of what is happening in Thailand, and we see similar movements in Myanmar. Actually, we have to talk about everything which is happening in the region. It's a replica of the Arab Spring, but now here this is the Asian Spring, and we need to we need to explain exactly. I mean, what happened in India. In the Arab world, we need to be very careful because it was extremely destructive, and we don't want this to happen in the region.
Angelo, can you name one country that came out of the Arab Spring better than when it went in?
No,
and the answer is no. And so this is what we're worried about with the Asia Spring, is that no nation going into the Asia Spring is going to come out better. If these protests, these mobs get their way, they will just run the country into the ground. This is all about encircling and containing China. So every single one of these movements that you just talked about, Angelo, in Hong Kong, they're Chinese people who are anti-China. Taiwan, same thing. The independence movement is anti-China, even though they're Chinese people. In Thailand, the leader, one of the leaders, billionaire Thanathorn Juangroongruangkit, he said that if he was prime minister, he would cancel, or he said we should just cancel the China-Thai high-speed rail and replace it with the U.S.-built Hyperloop, which doesn't even exist. In Myanmar, they're extremely anti-China. There are actually factions here in the Thai opposition who are just just hate China. That Francis guy who death threatened Angelo, do you remember that guy? He's very anti. He goes to the Chinese embassy at Hoi Quang in Bangkok all the time, protesting, saying how they're violating human rights. It never occurred to him to go to the U.S. embassy and also talk about human rights. Never occurred to him or to any of these people. I just want to address a question that I saw when we started this. What are all these red flags? There's actually a variety of red flags here. There's the Redem. You have to understand, this protest has been going on for over a year now, and they have had terrible turnout throughout the entire year, over a year. And actually, these protests have been going on and off since 2014, when the US-backed client regime, Thaksin Shinawatra and his sister Yingluck Shinawatra, were ousted from power in the military coup. They have always had very poor turnouts. So they have rebranded themselves many times because they carry out violence, they do horrible things, and then they try to rebrand so people don't link them to what they've done in the past. So Redem is one of the rebrands. You'll see red flags that say Truth Today. This was Thaksin Shinawatra's redshirt movement. Truth Today was one of their media platforms. People like Natawut and Jatapon, these redshirt leaders, senior redshirt leaders, did this media show called Truth Today. So you'll see Truth Today shirts and flags. I also saw Ratsadon. This is written in Thai, and that's just another rebrand of the ongoing current protests. They have all these different names: Free Youth, Redem, Ratsadon, all of these names. It's all rebrands of the exact same movement. It's all led by Thanathorn and Thaksin, these billionaires, and backed by the US. And because it's dragged on for so long, they've had to rebrand over and over again. Yeah, I remember debating with people online before I was kicked off of Twitter and Facebook, because like I said, these protests have been going on since 2014. And they said, no, this has nothing to do with the red shirts. Well, look at the protests today. If this guy gets his motorcycle going, maybe we'll check. It must not have been a big protest because it looks like it left them behind pretty fast. Let's see if we can find, that's post today. This is Thailand. Let's see. This is live.
So this is early stage. I mean, usually there's a disruption at this time of the day, but it gets more violent in the evening. So basically, in the evening they start blocking roads and start throwing petrol bombs against the police. But it's about creating this constant tension and a bit of chaos and a bit of anarchy in the set of Bangkok.
I want to point out also that you can see that they do these car mobs because so few people turn up for these protests. Thailand has a lot of traffic, even during the lockdown. There's a lot of traffic. So if you do a car mob and you see all these cars, you can't really tell which is part of the car mob and which is just the heavy traffic that's always in Bangkok streets. Some of these vehicles, like this one in the back, you can't, it's pickup truck, you can't see it now, but it's a news truck. So like, how many of these are actually protesters versus ordinary commuters and the significant media presence? Although admittedly, the media is practically part of the opposition. So that is also something else to point out with these protests. They've become very creative about hiding how few people actually turn up for these protests. Their large numbers exist online virtually because you can create, with specialized software, you could create 100, 1,000 accounts, control all of them, and make it look like your movement is 100 or 1,000 times larger than it really is. When it comes time to come out on the streets or vote in elections, they're very poorly represented, which is ironic because they say they're pro-democracy, and yet they consist of such a small minority.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that they promote themselves as being a socialist movement, anti the elites and so on, but they're actually run by the elites. Reminds me a little bit of Hong Kong. They started going up because of legitimate reasons, housing problems, income inequalities, but in reality, they were run by the elites, what we call the Hong Kong tycoons. What did they want in Hong Kong? They wanted to keep the status quo. The Hong Kong tycoons had negotiated that to still have their hands on monopolies. Monopolies meaning free rents. Basically, you don't allow competitions to get in, and you can keep very high prices on some monopolies like grocery. You know, like the grocery field in Hong Kong is run by the elites, so they keep prices high. So they wanted to keep the status quo, and so you get like people that actually should fight against you to come out on your behalf. So it's just how it's interesting to see how they hijack movement and positioning themselves as being socialist movement, which in reality they are actually working for the elites and the U.S. empire.
Yeah, this Thai opposition, there's nothing socialist or progressive about it at all. That is all camouflage that they hide behind. Let's see, usually it'll freeze like this and then it'll get going. Let's see what post today. So here's post today. So they'll all bunch up like this. When they all bunch up like this, it's very clear how few people actually showed up for this. When they all bunch up all in one group, you could tell. It's not really, these protests are very small and they just constantly do it, and people are so tired of it. And even the people participating, if you ask them, you know, what are you protesting for? They cannot give you an answer. All they can do is repeat what they heard people on the stage say. When you get into the particulars, they'll just call you names and laugh and make jokes. This is not a serious movement, but it has serious implications because it's contributing to instability during a time of crisis, economic crisis, because of the COVID restrictions around the globe. This is a global crisis, and the opposition leaders are trying to blame it on Thailand as if the current Thai government is responsible for the COVID crisis. It's an international crisis. It's not just in Thailand. Thailand is not the only country that has had trouble overcoming this crisis. I'm looking for some more questions here. If you have a question, like maybe put a big, like a Q or so, like a big capital Q in front of your question so I can spot it, and I'll do my best. Angela and I will do our best to answer your questions. As far as being socialist, I mean, Thailand already has universal health care. It has state-owned enterprises. People like to credit Thaksin Shinawatra for that. But if you study the origins of Thailand's universal health care, this was created by kind of like what you would call a technocrat who is always in the government or involved with the government, no matter who is in office. This was something that was going to happen anyway. The same thing with the government pharmaceutical organization that makes pharmaceuticals at cost so that people have access to cheap medication. These are all things that were going to happen anyway. it's kind of the same as saying, oh, Thaksin was prime minister when they finished the new international airport, therefore I'm giving him credit for that, even though it was in the making before he became prime minister. So it's a very childish way to look at politics, and it doesn't survive against any kind of scrutiny. Okay, why are they using bikes? Because a lot of them are these students, these young people who are basically like motorcycle gangsters. They come out on their bikes at night. They cause trouble even before the protests ever started, and they've been recruited into the protest to bolster their numbers, and they're kind of given a blank check at night to rampage through the city. And also, there's probably people on their bikes who are just, ordinary people. There's a lot of motorcycles in Thailand, especially in Bangkok. It's a cheap way to get around and beat the traffic too. When there's gridlock, you can go between the cars. So it's a little bit of both. When it turns night, if the violent elements break off from this protest, you will see they're all on motorcycles, and that's how they fight with the police. They hit the police and then they escape on their bikes. So, Angelo, the most violent elements in the Hong Kong protests, do you have any idea of what their kind of, on average, what their profile was, so we can kind of compare and contrast with the violent groups here in Thailand?
Well, they tend to come not from the center of Hong Kong. They tend to come from the district that are far from the center, district that are actually a bit, poor, lower education. Mainly kids. Well, keeping in mind that a lot of protesters in Hong Kong were actually paid. You had student programs, schools. Some schools are funded, are working with the Western universities, and they had programs where they would pay 1,200 kids $50 to attend protests. So again, when it comes to violence, it's always a mix. Average kids. Society in Hong Kong is not as violent from experience, because I've been coming to Thailand for a long time. In general, in Hong Kong, they tend to be not prone to violence, or if they do, it's a bit cowardish in a sense that they jump on one person, 10 people on one person, and they beat him up. But when it comes to Thailand, from my experience, it can get much more violent. Just to give you an idea.
Just real quick, that you see the yellow duck. This was lifted from the Hong Kong protests. They even admitted that. And so this is, I saw someone in the comments talk about the Milk Tea Alliance. Yes, that is exactly it. It's one giant US State Department project, and they just too lazy to come up with a new script for each one. So they just do it for the whole region. It makes it so much easier. And they can pretend that they all decided to organize on their own. But please continue, Angelo, about the profile of violence in Hong Kong.
Well, just to give you an idea, in terms of violence, the violence in Hong Kong came, mainly from the protesters. After 1 year of extremely violent protests, riots. They're not protests; they were riots, where they would burn shops, they would beat people. From morning till evening. Well, no one died except one person that was cleaning the streets. The protester, they threw a stone on him, and he died. It was the only person that actually died. When it comes to Thailand, it gets much more violent. You have actually people having guns in the crowd. I remember when I was in Bangkok in 2010, you had snipers. How many people died in 2010?
That was nearly 100, and this is what I'm talking about. The leader of this protest, Natau, in 2010, he and Jatapon and a number of others led those red shirts. They had the ordinary protesters who they themselves, there were violent elements there, but they mostly had slingshots, handguns, things like that. And then they brought in militants armed with war weapons, M16s, AK-47s, sniper rifles, hand grenades, grenade launchers. You see these guys kitted out for war, and on the first night of violence, They initiated violence, and the first people who died were Thai soldiers, riot control soldiers. They were killed. There was crossfire. I've talked about how they had a sniper, the red shirts had a sniper killing their own protesters to create martyrs, to radicalize and escalate the crisis, so that from that day, April 10th, 2010 onward until May, there were just mayhem all over Bangkok, and then it ended by burning down sections of Bangkok and even city halls up country in the provinces. It was crazy. It was a war zone, basically.
Yeah, I think it's important to explain how those colored revolution attempts work. We have the early examples where in 1988 in Burma was probably one of the very early experiments. Basically, the whole democracy was hijacked by Western-backed, mainly US-backed elements. We talk about NGOs. The US putting their hands on fake NGOs and media, and so there's a playbook. We call it the Gene Sharp Colored Revolution playbook, which was actually applied also in Tiananmen Square in 1989. So this playbook gets more and more sophisticated when now you have replicas, that are always further improved. Not many revolutions actually succeed. In the best case scenario for the US was Ukraine falling completely in the US sphere of influence. But how much did it cost? It cost $5 billion US. Victoria Nuland, she said it on live that cost $5 billion US. But what did it bring to Ukraine? I mean, nothing. I mean, basically, Ukraine before 2014 had 20% of its trade with Russia. After the revolution, it fell down to around 5%. But the share of trade with the US was at 2% before, and it stayed at 2%. So again, it's about asking the question, what does it bring? And also, there's the agenda behind this. Those revolutions are not for the people and are not related to bringing freedom or democracy. Those are marketing tools. What is behind this is geopolitics. It's about how we can further build up a US empire, which is run by the elites, which is not run by the people. So what people need to be careful here when it comes to Thailand is really to understand what is behind this, and always follow the money. When they are accepting foreign money, then it means they are accepting foreign meddling, and it's no more for, it goes against the sovereignty of the country. So this is what we're exposing here, is that people might have legitimate claims when it comes to social inequalities and so on. They might. I'm not questioning this, but what I'm questioning is that the foreign meddling and the massive money which is invested into creating chaos and a stronger opposition. Once you accept money from abroad, well, you are being a traitor, and this is what we are exposing. Do you have anything to add? I think it would be interesting if you can, Brian, if you can give a little bit the background. Well, the red shirt and also these movements, the meddling. I mean, and especially I think there's something interesting is a common point which has that Thailand opposition has with Myanmar as well, is that there's an NGO called ILO that wants to rewrite the constitution, and ILO is funded by NED. NED is National Endowment for Democracy. It's a rebranded name for the CIA. The same as we saw in Myanmar, you had those foreigners that were actually focusing, funded by the US aid, and they were actually focusing on rewriting the constitution. So my question is, I mean, why would you have foreigners there on the ground wanting to rewrite the constitution? I mean, reminding people that The constitution is the rule of the game when it comes to democracy. If you write the rule of the game, basically you're controlling the game.
Absolutely. So we have a question by from Boone about any chance of Thailand closing NED, USAID, NGOs, US aligned, just like Cambodia. And so this kind of touches on what you were just talking about, Angelo. Yes, the US government, through the National Endowment for Democracy, is funding the core organizations driving this protest that we see out on the streets right now. So there's media organizations like Prachatai, with a big following here in Thailand. They are funded completely by the US government, and their director, Chiranut, is actually a fellow at the National Endowment for Democracy. And I remember in 2011, when I exposed their NED funding, they tried for 6 months to cover it up and lie about it. And then they finally disclosed it, and they only disclosed it one time on their English language website. And they have never told their Thai readers about their US government funding. And they have the audacity to have a pop-up on every page of their website begging for money, and they get millions of baht from the US government, the corporate foundations in the West, various European governments, the audacity to beg for money when they are getting millions and then not even disclosing that. So that's the type of people that are at these fake NGOs. You talked about ILAW. So rewriting the Constitution is one of the 3 core demands of this protest. So they have a US government-funded front, ILAW, leading the petition to address one of their 3 core demands. The others are for the government to step down and to reform the monarchy. But by that, they really mean they want to abolish the monarchy. So rewriting the Constitution, ILAW organized a petition nationwide to collect signatures to try to get the Constitution rewritten. And just as you said, Angelo, they want to rewrite it because the current Thai Constitution checks and balances against Thaksin Shinawatra and people like Thanathorn Juangroongruangkit, who are trying to seize power in Thailand and destroy Thailand's indigenous institutions. What they really need is a national security law. So this goes back to Boone's question about any chance of uprooting the NED in Thailand. They have a draft NGO law right now that is supposed to put pressure on these NGOs, get some transparency going, start restricting some of the activities these foreign-funded NGOs are engaged in. But I don't know if that's going to go through. I don't know how well it will be enforced. To be honest with you, I've not seen a lot of promising moves made by the current Thai government, reflecting their understanding of how dangerous this is and what needs to be done to stop it. But I hope I'm wrong. I hope they're just kind of being quiet about it and they'll unveil it when it's all ready. Maybe. Kind of like the national security law in Hong Kong. A lot of people were giving up hope. And then like a bag of bricks, they dropped the national security law, took all of these foreign-funded agitators by surprise. Some of them went to jail. Some of them fled abroad. And then it was over permanently. It would be nice one day for these protests in Thailand to be over permanently. We didn't have the axe of instability hanging over our necks of people like Thaksin Shinawatra and Thanathorn Juangroongruangkit and their billionaire-led political parties claiming to fight for the people. It's just so absurd that anyone buys it in the year 2021. And they say people that respect and support Thailand's constitutional monarchy, they say that they're naive. But these are people who think billionaires care about them and aren't using them. Incredibly naive.
Well, the problem, just one thing, when we say that the West wants to export democracy, when in reality it's just an extension of what the West wanted to do in imperial time. The British Empire wanted to export civilization. Now it's just a new marketing. It comes in terms of freedom, human rights, and democracy. But what is happening is you see, there are strong laws in Thailand when it comes to the system, democratic system, is that they make sure that it's not hijacked by the elites, by the money. meaning that when you look at the US, there's unlimited, there's no limits to what the big corporation can invest into the electoral system. So once you have the money, you control the whole system. What the Thailand doesn't want is to have a replica of a system which is completely corrupted. And this is one of the reasons that they actually dissolved the party of Thanathorn. Maybe you can give a little bit the background, but Thanathorn actually made a loan to his own party, and they went against
It was a donation. He claimed it was a loan, but I mean, how is Future Forward Party going to pay back $110 million loan? It was a donation. He did it in blatant violation of Thai election laws. He knew it. There was an FCCT event where he was explaining it and how he kind of postulated that it might be the end of his party. And this is a billionaire. So he's sitting there. He couldn't remember if it was 100 million baht that he donated to Future Forward Party or 110, because to him, 10 million baht is pocket change. And this is what the people following him in the streets don't understand, is that this guy does not care about them. He's not an ordinary person. He was born into his fortune. He didn't earn that himself. His mom and dad earned that money. Now they handed the fortune over to him. He's going to criticize the Thai monarchy because he says he's against inherited power and wealth. He himself is a product of inherited power and wealth. And what is he doing with that wealth? He's doing this. He's creating disruption in the streets of Thailand. He's not helping anybody with that money. And right now, people need help. You know, this is an economic crisis. He could be out there helping. And he could do it cynically to get support from the Thai people, but someone like him is incapable of actually solving real problems. This is what he does. This is why the U.S. picked him. People like him, people like Thaksin Shinawatra, because they're big people in the sense that they have a lot of money and influence, but they're small people in terms of their vision and their outlook and their understanding of the world around them. And so this is what empire looks for: insecure little people who have power and wealth, that they can use their insecurities as kind of like a carrot to dangle ahead of them to keep them going.
Yeah, another thing is that when you look at the elites, no matter where are the elites, I mean the big corporations and so on, do you really think that they care about countries? They don't. Even in the U.S., the elites in the U.S., they have a house in Paris. They have they own islands. The U.S. is a shell for maybe the assets, but in reality they don't care about the countries because they can move around. So if the U.S. tomorrow is destroyed, well, they still have a way out. So you see, the thing is that those elites like Thanathorn or even Thaksin, well, Thaksin has a very good life in Dubai and is multi-billionaire. He's been taking lots of money out of selling state-owned assets, Thai state-owned assets to his friends, the Carlyle Fund. Thaksin come from a Carlyle, was it the Carlyle group, right? Which is a group that focuses on selling, getting profit from selling state-owned assets. So you see, it's the revolving door. People going from a private corporation to power, and then enriching themselves and their friends.
There was actually one case where Thaksin wanted to sell off shares of one of his companies. So he was prime minister at the time. He changed the law on a Friday, and then once it went into effect, he sold the shares on a Monday tax-free. This is the kind of stuff that he did. There's another case here, and this is kind of bordering on Thailand's internal political affairs, but I think it's important to point out the hypocrisy. There was a police officer who on CCTV just basically murdered a guy, a drug suspect, just murdered him. It wasn't when you watch the footage, there's no question what he did is absolutely wrong. It's not one of those things where it's wrong, but no, it's just absolutely wrong. This is a problem that Thailand has had for a long time, though. Corruption among certain factions in the police, And it's one of those things that really does need to get taken care of, but that is the Thai people's business to get that under control. The thing that I want to point out, though, is how this opposition out in the streets right now are trying to use that case of that case of corruption and murder. They're trying to use that and link it to the government, to the monarchy. And it's very dishonest because this has always been a problem. And as a matter of fact, you see them all wearing their red shirts. They're all supporters of Thaksin Shinawatra. In 2003, Thaksin Shinawatra initiated what he called a war on drugs. In the course of 90 days, he did that to 1,800 people. Over 1,800 people died in extrajudicial executions in the streets all across Thailand. So people are outraged by that CCTV footage of that police officer and his subordinates killing that man. But that's what Thaksin Shinawatra's government was doing to 20 people a day during the 90-day war on drugs. Where's the outrage about that? See, that's the thing about being consistent and principled. I can condemn both. I can condemn both unconditionally and without slipping in a but. Dawa, no, there's no but. But the opposition cannot do that. They can only selectively direct their outrage when it suits them, and then when it doesn't, they'll make excuses. So I've heard a lot of people say, oh, well, that war on drugs was supported by the Thai people, so what's your problem with that? You're killing people in the streets without a formal charge or an arrest or a trial. You're just murdering people. If you don't understand that, you shouldn't be allowed to vote, because voting requires an informed electorate. And if you don't even know the very basics of how the legal system works and how it's not okay to just murder people in the streets, why are you voting? Why would anyone respect your vote? This has been the problem with Thaksin Shinawatra and his supporters for now 20-something years now.
Yeah, I think it's important to remind also people that this is part of why funding the opposition in Thailand is it's related to the game between the US and China. Basically, what Thailand has in terms of position when it comes to China is very pragmatic. It doesn't want to take side, and it's actually focusing on its sovereignty and its country's interest. What they want to do is that they want to go back to when Thaksin was in power, and Thaksin actually joined the war on terror. He joined the invasion of Iraq. So this is what they want to try. They're trying to do. They want to have a regime which is favorable to the US, and that would fight against China. And we see this pressure of the US that they're trying to put on in the whole region. This is why Kamala Harris has been traveling to Singapore and Vietnam, and it's not working. It's actually, I think, on the long run, it's going to backfire, because those countries, they do understand that they're being used. At the end of the day, it's not benefiting Thai people to turn around against China. 30% of the trade of Thailand is with China, and China is a close neighbor. There's border with Thailand. Why would you partner with a country that is imperialistic, that is oppressing the global South, and that wants to use you to be the flesh? You would have you would be the first victim if you were to clash against China, because your trade is with China. Why go against? You've had like thousands of years of peaceful interaction with China. Why would you side against China for a friend which is a fake friend, which is just using you? So it doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
Here is a comment by Hang Tua. I hope I'm saying that correct. It says Payut and the foreign minister, and they're talking about China and poverty alleviation in northern Thailand. This is a good point. As a matter of fact, poverty alleviation and development in the north and northeast is kind of why this protest right now that we're watching looks like we're just looking at traffic, because that's where the red shirts, that's where they drew people from. This was an impoverished place. I mean, it's hit or miss depending where you go. It's always kind of playing catch up with the rest of Thailand. And the government now in power has invested a lot in draining those swamps where people would feel the need to want to come out and go to Bangkok and protest and stir up trouble. So we're watching a lot of that happen already. And then as far as China's role in poverty alleviation in Thailand's north and northeast, the high-speed rail is going to pass through there. There's going to be stations in Thailand's northeast. This is going to transform the region. This is going to turn it from kind of distant from the shores, the coasts of Thailand and the coastal cities. This is going to transform that region and bring in so many people and so many opportunities. And think about it, that is one of the things that's going to help for Thailand to move forward. And this is one of the things Thanaton said openly, directly, that he wants to block. Think about that. There's a question: is the new Malaysian government a U.S. stooge? The new Malaysian government, that was the party that got voted out in 2018. That the U.S. NED was bragging about getting thrown out of power, and so now they're back. It's hard. They're not really a U.S. stooge because you're going to see protests in Malaysia trying to get them out. They could do a much better job resisting U.S. meddling in Malaysia. But the alternative is just a straight up sock puppet regime backed by the U.S. And those are the ones you're going to see protesting in the streets. We saw the protests in Malaysia kind of start up a little bit, and then the government resigned, and now this new government came in. We just kind of have to wait and see what happens with that. But that is the old political party that had been running Malaysia since it gained independence from Britain, and the U.S. does not like that party. They want them out of power.
Yeah, Brian, I think it's more a power of disruption. What those oppositions are bringing in Southeast Asia is just blocking and delaying projects related to the Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, again, those projects of Belt and Road Initiative is not China that is imposing on those countries to join the Belt and Road Initiative. In reality, those countries are actually reaching out to China because they know that it's going to be a win-win. It's an integration of all Eurasia. It's going to diminish lead time. It's going to be it's about connectivity. It's a shift of gravity when it comes to the world economy. It's a huge revolution. It's quite unique what he can bring to a country. So in reality, it's just bringing disruption. You remember the video that there's an American official is talking about what they did to Malaysia, that they had been funding the Malaysian opposition for 20 years. And he's bragging about the fact that once the opposition was in place, the first thing that the opposition did was to cancel the Belt and Road Initiative project. Bragging about this, when you think about those infrastructure projects, they are the foundation for growth. You need infrastructure, you need roads, you need plants, you need dams. Those are the foundations. Once you have that, you have a foundation for prosperity, and you can grow. If you don't have a road, how can you prosper? Take the example of Myanmar. Most of the Myanmar, there are many places don't have electricity and roads. When you are going against those infrastructure projects, you are going against your own country's interest. It has nothing to do with China. You are going against your own interest, and they are using those NGOs, fake NGOs, which are which are related to ecology. They say, well, you don't have to have. We don't want you to have a dam which is going to bring you electricity because we want to save some flowers and some birds. I mean, people need to, they need basic human rights, which we enjoy in the West. We have a certain level of prosperity. How can you deny a big part of the global South to access to a certain level of prosperity? This is imperialism, but just rebranded and being controlled by fake human rights NGOs.
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about this all the time. about how the US represents 4% of the world's population, and the actual people pursuing American empire is much smaller than that, even a fraction of that. And in order for such a small group of people to control the entire planet, you have to arrest development. And that's what they do. And they use all kinds of marketing scams and schemes to, just like you said, for a dam is development. These people need development. They need electricity. They need flood control. They need irrigation. This is how civilization progresses. And they will block it by claiming, just like you said, some environmental issue, or, hey, there's 24 villages along the river and they fish the river for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's actually a problem that people should try to solve. That's not something you should try to preserve. People fishing the river, that's not sustainable, and they're only doing that because they don't have economic opportunities. So this is the US deliberately obstructing these people from reaching real economic opportunities and development in general. And the irony is that they use US aid, which is supposed to be a development fund, to do this. They invest money specifically to block development. It's crazy. When you start looking into it, there's no end, and they're doing it everywhere. So you're talking about a dam, that's actually very relevant to what we're looking at right now. So people that are just joining us, this is live in Bangkok. These are the US-backed mobs out on the streets. You know, they do these car mobs because they cannot get a proper large-scale protest going. And this looks more impressive because they can mingle in with just the heavy traffic that's always in Bangkok streets. You know, you can look along the side of the road. You'll see some people coming out. Some people are just looking. Some people are supporting them. Other than that, it's really very unimpressive. So getting back to the dams, the Mekong River passes through Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, all these countries, all these Southeast Asian countries on the mainland. And so the U.S. has a Mekong-U.S. partnership because they care so much about the Mekong River on the other side of the planet. And that's all they do, is they fund all these fake NGOs to constantly complain about China upstream, because the Mekong passes through China as well. They fund them to complain about China and to block any dam project at all. They don't care how it's designed or what considerations are taken into account. They don't care. They just don't want any dams built. They want these impoverished villages to be fishing for their breakfast, lunch, and dinner indefinitely. And so this is the US version of partnership and friendship and development. This is what they do. And I actually have a video coming out, should be out this week, about the Mekong-US partnership and how the US pretends they care about development and they're going to compete with China, but they're doing the exact opposite.
Yeah, you mentioned just before the soft way of disruption through NGOs. In reality, they are the hardest way, which is actually funding terrorist movements. We saw it in Balochistan. Balochistan has a huge deal with China when it comes to infrastructure, same as Iran. So how did they disrupt there? It's funding Balochistan separatist movements. And what are they doing now? It's just putting bombs, and they're targeting Chinese engineers that are working on the Belt and Road Initiative. So you see, it just depends on every country a different strategy. So here, where are we here in Bangkok? So what are they doing? The strategy, what they do on Saturday is basically running around Bangkok.
This is Sunday, and they because the red shirts traditionally always came out on Sunday, and they called it Red Sunday, and it's a part of Thai culture where each day of the week is assigned a color, and Sunday happened to be red, and so the red shirts kind of hijacked this, and then they will do their activities on Sunday, Red Sunday, and this is going through all over Bangkok. And the route was announced well ahead of time, so any supporters will be out to look at it, and that's what this is for. This is to get pictures and to make it look like a big movement. In reality, they cannot get any sort of substantial protest on the street. Bangkok is a city of 12 to 14 million people. If they were really upset about what was happening, or wanted the government out, or supported this opposition, you could have 1 million people out on the streets. Because in 2014, when people in Thailand protested against Thaksin Shinawatra and Yingluck Shinawatra, that government that was in power from 2011 to 2014, on peak days, there would be 1 million people out in the streets. You could walk anywhere in any direction, and it's just protesters everywhere. And there were multiple major rallying sites, and there were like trails of people walking from one site to the other. I've never seen anything like it before, and I have not seen anything like it since. This current protest has been going on since for about a year now, and then on and off since 2014, since Yingluck was ousted. They have never even come remotely close to that sort of protest. Not even remotely close. Not even close to the redshirt protests in 2010, which were larger than this by quite a bit as well.
Yeah, Brian, I think it's for us, it's important to start exposing this. I mean, those movements could become much bigger. I mean, the region. We mentioned we like to draw the parallel with the Arab Spring and how destructive was the Arab Spring. I think here we see early indicators of Asian Spring, and we see what is happening here is just a continuation of what happened in Hong Kong under the Military Alliance, which is all an invention, a creation of the US. We even saw Twitter even actually creating an emoji, especially for the Military Alliance. Maybe you can find you can show maybe the some information about this, but this is not. It's not an initiative, local initiative. Overnight, it popped up in different countries, India, in Myanmar, in Thailand, in Malaysia, the same logo, three fingers, exactly, this one. And actually,
so this is BBC Military Alliance. Twitter creates emoji for pro-democracy activists. You could even see by this picture, it's Thailand, Myanmar, Hong Kong, and they tried to add Malaysia. Tried to add Malaysia to the mix, and Taiwan, and the Uyghurs, and Tibet.
Yeah, again, when you look at those revolutions, name me one revolution that was actually initiated by the citizens of the country. You know, you can take, there are many examples. Yugoslavia, the Balkanization of Yugoslavia was a EU and US initiative. And you have countless of those revolutions that are always part of the US empire initiative is destructive. And mostly it never worked. It never works.
I see somebody saying about how China needs to ride out the hatred. I generally think that is China's overall strategy, is to just be patient. I mean, there's certain things that they have to actively do. One thing that I would really, could China be doing, or Russia, or both, ideally both, what could they be doing? They export weapons to Southeast Asia. Thailand is replacing all of its old US military hardware with Chinese defense systems, main battle tanks, naval vessels, like very big items, not just small things, and very large deals. What would really be nice is if Russia and China exported the means of defending Thailand's information space. By that I mean platforms for social media that Thailand could use to replace Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and get control of their information space. There is this alternative media. He's a person, Somthi. People in Thai know who Somthi is. And whatever, you don't have to agree with everything he says, but I think overall he does a lot of good. And YouTube looks like they're going to delete his channel. He has over 1 million subscribers. And so what did he do? He created his own app with Tencent, which is a Chinese tech company, and they do a lot of social media and online services. And so he went to them, and they're helping him create his own app so that his fans can follow him, his audience can follow him, and he can say whatever he wants and he doesn't have to worry about YouTube censorship. Now, why isn't the Thai government doing something like that? Because all of Thai society faces the same sort of control over their information space by the US-based social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook. Twitter deletes hundreds and hundreds of accounts of people speaking up against this opposition we see in the streets. And like I said, a lot of it is about creating the illusion of mass support on online to kind of panic people into thinking that they're in the minority, when in fact they're not. They're in the majority. This, I don't know what this guy is looking at directions on his phone, and I guess they're looking at like the route. They're going through this route, and like I said, I mean, if you had like less than 1,000 cars, but like a couple of hundred cars, it would look like a massive protest. If they really had like tens of thousands of people, they wouldn't be able to do this. They would just have a rally in the center of the city, and they can't do that because they don't have tens of thousands of people coming out.
Yeah, what happens is that there's one thing that, when you look at the society, there's always a large majority, which is a silent majority, which is not politicized. So what happens is that those movements, they are hijacked they hijack a democracy or a city with only a small minority which is violent. And you don't need much. In Hong Kong, you had maybe 5% of people that were really radicalized, and they could hijack the whole city of Hong Kong. Now, just what we see here, Brian. So usually, what they do on Sunday, so they go around, but then once you are in the evening, they block certain areas of the city, and they start throwing petrol bombs and harassing the police. That's what they do, right?
Yes. So we actually, you and I, Angelo, we've done a couple of these now, these live streams of the US-backed mobs in Bangkok. People just joining us, that's what we're looking at live in Bangkok. This is a car mob, so that it's the very small US-backed opposition driving around Bangkok, trying to make their movement look bigger than it really is. And then what they do in the evening is they start fighting with the police. You'll have we saw the motorcycles, a group of them are very hardcore, violent. Before there were ever any protests, these were vocational schools that used to fight and kill each other just for petty rivalry, nothing political. And so they've been recruited into the protest movement to kind of help enhance the menace of this protest. It's kind of like holding peace and stability of the city hostage until the opposition gets what they want. This is kind of what they're doing. And so you and I, Angelo, we saw them protesting at Democracy Monument, and they do their activities, and the police are nowhere to be found. They let them do whatever they want at Democracy Monument. And then you saw them, the journalists, drive out away from Democracy Monument to where the police were, way down the road. And we saw a group of the protesters go toward the police and start throwing bombs and bottles and bricks at the police. And actually, we didn't. Well, there was no way for us to have seen this, but there was a person with a security camera in their car. A lot of Thai people have these in their cars, and they just tape while they're driving. And one of those bombs hit their windshield, and it cracked their windshield. So these aren't like firecrackers; these are explosives. And it broke their windshield. And then the police fire tear gas, rubber bullets. They have to disperse them. They're endangering people's lives. And then the media films it and says, look at the police brutalizing these children. They call them children because they're 14, 15, 16. They're underage minors, but they're capable of killing each other because that's what they were doing before these protests started. They were killing each other in these school rivalries. And this is all the context that is left out of coverage of these protests in Bangkok. They make it out as if it's youth-led, self-organized, organic. They're violent because the police cracked down on them first. No, none of that is true. It's all lies. They did this in Myanmar with the lies, in Hong Kong, as Angelo has been telling us. Every time we do these streams, what we saw in the Arab Spring, all lies. The violence is being initiated by the protesters. The protesters came out and didn't do any violence. Why would the government try to stop the protest? Why would they care? If like 100 people went to Democracy Monument, pranced around for an hour and went home, why would the government care? It's because after that, they go and they start violence and destruction and arson. So this is what the protests, the people covering the protests will not tell you. Yes, Thais are tired of the protests. Yes, that's true. Everyone that I've talked to, they're tired of it. The silent majority is tired of it. They're getting frustrated with the government because they're not doing anything about it, seemingly. Not fast enough.
It's interesting when they're claiming that they want more democracy. In reality, they are actually the one suppressing democracy. I remember in Hong Kong, if you didn't agree with the protesters, they would beat you up. They would use violent methods of intimidation. So it's extremely anti-democratic. When you are destroying things because you're angry with the government, that this is not democratic. Democracy happens when you're voting, when you're electing someone. That's partly democratic. And then we mentioned this before. There are lots of preconditions to have a democracy, but when there is violence, actually you cannot have democracy because democracy is being hijacked by minorities of violent elements. So it's important. I think there's a lot of people that have a misconception of democracy, and also democracy requires maturity. Maturity meaning that people need to respect each other's differences. And actually the differences, when you have differences, you can work together and find a better solution together. But it's not about suppressing the other side or using violent methods of intimidation.
Absolutely. Well, there's another aspect of this. You're right, because that's the exact same case for Thailand. These protesters intimidate and harass anyone who disagrees with them. They've have tried and succeeded in ruining people's businesses for coming out publicly and just expressing their displeasure with the protests. So that's highly undemocratic and actually coercion and kind of borders on terrorism. If you're using violence or the threat of violence to advance your political agenda, that is terrorism. But there's another aspect that makes them anti-democratic. There was an election in 2019, a general election in Thailand in 2019. Thanaton's Future Forward Party lost by over 2 million votes. So that's one of the guys that the protesters want in power. And Thaksin Shinawatra, his party, Pheu Thai, it lost by over 500,000 votes. And so they lost the election. And what do these pro-democracy protesters do when they lose an election? Instead of getting ready for the next election and maybe contributing to society in the meantime to show their good faith and their goodwill for the country, they're trying to extra-legally evict the government from power. That's what they're doing. That sounds very anti-democracy to me at face value. That's very anti-democratic. But it's funny how the BBC, Voice of America, Reuters, all of them, the whole gang, how none of them seem to pick up on that. And that's very deliberate. They do that very deliberately. I remember in 2014, when the protesters came out against the US-backed client regime of Yingluck and Thaksin Shinawatra, they actually would call the protesters anti-democracy protesters because they were trying to block a vote where the prime minister is holding the seat for a convicted criminal, a fugitive, trying to run the country from his hotel room in Dubai. And they're saying people that don't want an election to take place under those conditions, they're anti-democratic. So this is what you get. And of course, the BBC does that all the time. They lie about everything. Before we did this live, if people are watching, just joining us, this is live in Bangkok. We're watching the US-backed mobs. It doesn't really look like a mob because it's a car mob, and they're driving through the city, and the journalist is having a hard time finding the mob because it's not that big. We were just doing our weekly episode of Inflection. We were talking about the BBC and their lies and how ridiculous their lies are, to the point where they actually Photoshop pictures of scenery in China to make the trees gray instead of green. This is what the BBC does. So the BBC, Reuters, AP, AFP, they're all exactly the same. They're all working at the same level of deception. Let me look through some of the comments.
There's a good comment here. Pikachu saying the level of violence in Hong Kong was designed specifically to provoke a reaction from the PLA. China called their bluff. Well, that is what they wanted. It reminds me a little bit of remember Chai Ling in 1989 Tiananmen Square. She was actually wishing that there was a bloodshed in Tiananmen Square, which never happened. Nobody died on the Tiananmen Square. We did a show about this. So it's the same. You need to create martyrs, and you need to have an escalation, and somehow you could gather more support. And if you actually hijack the narratives to the media, you can get to the momentum where you can overthrow a government. We saw this. There's a very good case in 2014 in Maidan Square in Ukraine. You had the US pouring $5 billion to overthrow a democratically elected government. And it succeeded. What they did, they used snipers that were shooting at both sides. They were Georgians. And it created a momentum where people, they didn't get the whole picture of what was happening. They thought that the police was shooting at peaceful protesters, and they actually they managed to overthrow the government. So I think there's a key element for a successful colored revolution is to hijack the narrative and to get to the momentum where you can overthrow, somehow you can mislead the majority, and you can overthrow a government. But again, those are usually it doesn't work. And in the best case scenario, they get a puppet regime. But again, the losers are the country themselves. I mean, you saw in the Arab Spring, which country came out better out of the Arab Spring? Ukraine. Ukraine is worse than ever. The economy is completely destroyed, and so it's just that people don't learn. It's important that they need to look at first their national interest, rather than buying into some fake democracy which is managed out of Washington.
But this is why the US-backed protest leaders and these fake NGOs, this is why they go after kids, because they know kids don't have experience. They didn't learn about these things in school. They also go after rural folks because they know a lot of them stopped studying, before they finished what Westerners would consider high school, and so they don't have a complete primary education. So what you will see is them preying on the most vulnerable people in society to get them to sign up for these movements, to get them out onto the streets as cannon fodder. And it's unfortunate. And then I try to tell people, don't get so upset with the kids, even though they're violent, and some of them are real nasty. Some of them are just plain thugs that should be in jail. But you have to think of how they ended up like that. They didn't wake up one day and choose to be that way. They had poor upbringing. They missed some opportunities in life. These rural folks that are recruited and brought into Bangkok to join these protests, they're not doing it because they think they're destroying their country. They don't really realize it. But the people running these NGOs, I know they know, because when I expose them, they deliberately lie and cover it up. They know they're doing something wrong. If they thought it was harmless, they would be very transparent about their NED funding, and they're not. And they're not because they know how bad it looks, and they know what they're doing, and they're doing it for selfish reasons. And they're drawing these people, poor folks and young people, out into the streets to risk their lives, ruin their future when they break the law and they go to jail. That's their whole future, and they're doing that deliberately. So people have to look at the source of this problem, not really. Don't get caught up in fighting with the kids and these rural folks and these other people. It's like a cult of personality for some of them. It's a cult. They're brainwashed. Go to the source. Look at the source. Follow the money. This is what needs to be done. And about the Chinese tank. Everything about Tiananmen Square, when you really look into it, it is almost exactly the opposite of what people have been told for decades, really. And it's the same thing with the 2010 protests in Bangkok. If you read the Western media's accounts for that, they say the military cracked down on peaceful protesters, or mostly unarmed protesters. They will not mention the militants, or if they do, they'll mention them in passing and try to make it as ambiguous as possible as to who they were. So now some of these people you see on the side of the road, they look like they might be setting up for some violence. So, why are they stopped? What are they doing? And those are the types that we see come out in the evening to fight with the police and destroy property. When I say destroy property, I mean they burn down traffic control booths, traffic control cameras, signs for managing traffic, police equipment and trucks. This is what they do. They're not just like lighting an effigy or something like as part of a normal protest. They're doing real property destruction.
Yeah, just going back to the Ukraine Maidan revolution, Brian. The kids, they were promised by the EU politicians that came into the Maidan Square. I mean, there was a breach of national sovereignty, this meddling into Ukraine politics. But they were promised by EU leaders and Americans that they would get easy access to visa so they could emigrate to those countries and work abroad. So you see, they actually bought into this idea of, oh, maybe I can have a better life abroad. But what did it bring to Ukraine? How does it benefit? This is like a selfish motive to say, well, I'm not going to work in my country to get my country to be better. I will be able to go abroad, but in reality, you are going to provide cheap labor to Western countries. But on the other side, what happened is that the Ukraine got destroyed. The economy is destroyed, and the only way that people that can survive is that they need to go abroad. And all the promises that the West gave to Ukraine, they never fulfilled those promises. They were just used as like a used condom. So you just throw away, and that's a pity. So this is why they need to be really careful. How is it benefiting my country? Is same as in Hong Kong. They were pushed to do mutual destruction. So basically, the slogans were, if we will burn together. If I burn, you will burn with me. How is it benefiting to Hong Kong and society? It's just anarchy.
Yeah, and without coincidence, that is one of the phrases that we see at the protests here in Bangkok. If we burn, you burn, everyone burns. Oh, what kind of vision is that for your country? It's completely insane. And over what? Over what? Because your political party lost in the election, because people are starting to see through Thaksin and Thanaton. There's a lot of legitimate criticism you could have for this government, believe me. But the alternative is not an alternative. Just like Thanaton saying cancel the Thai-Chinese high-speed rail and replace it with Hyperloop. The Hyperloop doesn't exist and won't for years, decades, possibly. So it's not a real solution. And so people might not be happy with the government right now in Thailand or how they're handling COVID or whatever. But the alternative is someone who has promised you that he's going to run the country into the ground. He is going to sabotage ties between Thailand and China very deliberately, and he's going to run the country into the ground. He has promised that. That was like what he campaigned on. And so why would anyone be interested in this guy and this opposition who's out burning the country? Another thing that the protesters are complaining about is how the government is handling COVID. They're upset. They say the government hasn't done enough to stop it from spreading. So what are they doing right now? They're driving around the entire city. They're going to be out on motorcycles driving around the city. If they think that this virus is spreading around, how is this activity not just another way of spreading it around even more? Unnecessary and spreading it around more. How do they justify that in their minds? And it's because COVID, like everything else they complain about the government, is an excuse. They don't actually ever really bring up legitimate criticism of the government. There's plenty, but they never bring it up. All of it is about just them worming their way into power. And actually, we've seen this so many times with all of these US-backed protests, they just have these slogans. They don't actually have a real legitimate concern that they're able to articulate. And this is how you could tell the difference between a legitimate protest and these fake color revolutions. There are legitimate protests in Thailand, but you never hear about them because they don't help the opposition media and the Western media advance their agenda. They'll come out, they'll protest, but then they'll talk to the government and come to some sort of concession and resolve the issue. And it's a very specific problem that they have, like, you know, the price of rubber or something, and the government will make some deal with them, meet in the middle somewhere, and then they'll go home, and then everyone's happy and everyone gets back to business. That's not what this protest is doing. They just want to get into power. There's no issue that they want solved. They just want to get into power. That's what this is all about.
I think exactly.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Angelo.
Well, I think it's important for those protesters to understand that sovereignty is the most important thing. Again, you know, if you don't have sovereignty, you cannot have a democracy, because democracy is a process of self-determination. Once you have money, foreign money, which is meddling to your country, and you are accepting this money, you are being a traitor. You are not working in the interest of your own country. I mean, this is the main thing. Again, we are not for an ideology. You and I, it doesn't really matter if it's a left movement, right movement. We're not too much into those labels. I personally tend to think that those labels are dividing people. You know, if you're Republican, Democrats, it's just divisive, but it's a distraction from the important things. So when I look at a country, the first thing I look at is self-determination. You know, is it a process of self-determination? If there is foreign meddling, well, you are not on the right path to democracy. So you need to protect your own sovereignty, having like very strong national security laws, and then you can start having to be in the process of a democracy. And again, you know, to have a democracy, you need maturity. You need some preconditions. And again, Western style democracy applies to the West. Doesn't necessarily apply to other countries that have a different history and culture. I mean, we see the examples of Afghanistan or Iraq or Libya. Those are tribal system. It's been working for thousands of years. When you had like the tribes that go around the table, and you have a person or king above that makes sure that is a referee and monitor this democratic system. So by us wanting to export very often a failed Western-style democracy into other countries and trying to hijack them by pouring money into opposition movements and fake NGOs, I mean, how hypocrite is that? And why would you want to export a system which is not working? Most of Western-style democracy are not working. They are fake democracies for the 1% and ruled by the elites. So we need to do first of all, you know, a self-reflection on our own system and really stop this agenda, which is imperialistic. It's just a better marketing, but it's just imperialistic. Let the Thai people decide for their own system and stop interference.
By the way, they're at Dindang intersection, so this is where all the armed thugs go to fight with the police. And you can see this is where all the motorcycles that were invited out to the protest led by that red shirt leader, Natawu. He knows they're going to come out, and he knows they're going to go here, and he knows there's going to be violence. This is what they're doing. So no one's showing up for these protests. What they need is martyrs. So they have these ultra-violent vocational students who on ordinary days would be killing each other anyway, and they send them out there, and they're going to keep sending them out there as often as possible until someone dies. Either the protesters kill someone, and it's ambiguous enough where the Western media can spin it and suggest maybe it was the police, or the police make a mistake and accidentally kill someone. Because these protesters, they come out with weapons. They come out with machetes. They come out with explosives, bricks, petrol bombs. We have seen guns, handguns. When you're doing stuff like that, it's only a matter of time before someone gets killed. And they keep doing this almost daily. And now they've got this big protest. So you see them going around on the motorcycles. They're all waving the flags that we just saw in the sanctioned car mob, sanctioned by the official protest leaders. And then the Western media is going to say, well, this is an unofficial protest. But the official protest knew that it was going to end like this. So I'm asking someone to send me the map. There was a map of the route that they were going to take. I need to find out if they passed by Dindang or it's over, and so they all decided to go to Dindang because this is their little battleground. This is a place where a lot of people live. They've been tormenting these people. The opposition media is trying to spin it as if it's the police. It's their fault for dispersing a violent armed gang off the streets of like a couple of hundred people. I see the media is all here and ready to go to document it. This is not like a surprise that this was going to happen. And if the police try to disrupt this, they will complain about that also and say, oh, they didn't even do anything yet. Why are you arresting people? So that this is exactly like what the US and US-backed protests do everywhere all the time. They create the crisis, and then they try to tie the hands of the government when dealing with it and use the government's response, spin it in the worst way possible. You could see these kids came here for a fight. They're here for a fight. They could just go home. The protest is over. Car mob is done. They could go home, but they don't want to. They're going to go fight with the police.
Well, it is like the equivalence of I mean, kids in the West, they might just go, you know, they have the means to play paintball, and here it's a different game. It's just like it's the weekend activity to try to beat up police. The new cool thing to do, just to do destruction and to play a hero. I mean, is people. This is how kids are manipulated. Is that, you know, they sell them the idea of playing heroes. Oh, I can see that there are now actually there's a tear gas. They started
tear gas. Yeah, as you can see, and you can see they're going up to the police to go fight with the police. They have picked this fight, and they've done this constantly. They do this every single time, and they act as if the police were the ones that provoked it. They deliberately came here to confront the police. This is their purpose. And what is their point? Why are they on the street right now? What are they doing? They're just there to cause violence. And the organizers knew this. I'm checking the map now. So, I mean, this is where the violence starts. So it starts out where they pretend it's a peaceful protest, but they knew it was going to evolve into this. And so the protest organizers calling these people out to the streets, they know it's going to happen, and so they should be held responsible. But, you know, people keep saying, why isn't the government doing anything? The laws are so weak, they're so poorly enforced, and you know, the opposition leaders are untouchable because they're billionaires, they're backed by foreign governments. They have the Western media backing them. They have these fake human rights organizations, not just the NED-funded organizations here in Thailand, funded by the US government, but Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, fake organizations like that come in and say, if you do anything to these opposition leaders, we're going to turn you into the next North Korea. Yeah, the protests are always small like this. They're not big. They're just extremely violent and disruptive and constant. This is just what they do. It's the exact same group of people. You'll start to if you watch these streams often enough, you'll start to recognize it's specific individuals because it's the exact same people that come out every single time. And again, this is a city of 12 to 14 million people, the city and the surrounding areas. And this is all that turns up for them. That should make people think.
Yeah, and then the police, the main task of the police is actually protecting lives. They are more concerned about protecting the protesters' lives than anything else. Public property comes second. The same as in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong police would turn a blind eye. You know, I mean, the protesters were doing destruction, but they were more concerned about protecting the lives of people, including the protesters, because the last thing they want is an escalation. And this is what people are asking. Sometimes they wish they had martyrs, an accident of a protester being killed, then they can build up the whole propaganda out of a martyr.
And we've already seen them try to do that. There's this very I don't know how to politely say it. If you're Thai, not this Hyso guy. He used to be he wasn't actually a protest leader in 2014. He was like a minnow swimming among giants. He wanted to be like someone very important, but he just wasn't ever cut out for it. It's just his lot in life. And then he decided he was going to join this protest, even though it's completely on the opposite side of where he claimed he was before. And he said he's woken up. He's not blind anymore. But what he is, he's an opportunist. And he's on the same level as the rest of the protest leaders here. So he's more suited to this group. And he lost an eye, allegedly. And they're trying to make a semi-martyr out of him, and it's not really working out too well. And he has to be careful because they might upgrade his martyrdom to full martyr. And all of these protest leaders need to really be careful, because if they're not performing well, if they're not a good return on investment for the backers of these protests, they will turn you into a full martyr and see if you're more valuable to them that way. And they have done this. Angelo just pointed out how they did it in Ukraine. They did it in the Middle East. They've actually done it in Thailand before. In 2010, they were killing redshirt protesters to make martyrs out of them. So be very careful. And we see the protesters know they're not supposed to be here. They're deciding to stay here. They have no demand. There's nothing in this area. This is just where they decided to go fight with the police. And so this is exactly like Hong Kong. They're just out there for chaos.
It's interesting how they prop up those kids. They choose elements that actually they tap into the ego. So you see, like a Joshua Wong in Hong Kong, overnight he becomes like an icon, and he was nobody. He's not a good student. Then overnight he's on Time magazine, Person of the Year, or whatever, and they tap into the ego, and they're willing to sacrifice their life, but in reality, they're being used. And once the U.S. empire has no use of you, they discard you. I mean, you saw Aung San Suu Kyi, how the West prop up Aung San Suu Kyi. They made a movie about her. They gave her the Nobel Peace Prize. And now they just kind of discard her. Because of the role she had in the Rohingya issue. She was part of the problem when it came to the genocide of the Rohingyas. So you see, it's how you can use what I call the useful idiots, because at the end they're just being used, but you just don't realize it. And I think the ego plays a big part. It's so easy to tap into the ego of those kids. Overnight you were a simple student, and overnight you become the center of the media, and kids are easily manipulated.
This is such an important point. I can't overstate this enough. What they used to do is make you extremely popular by, just like Angelo said, putting you on the cover of Time magazine or inviting you to the White House. And this was to make you feel important and really gain your loyalty in selling out your own country for the West, for American empire. They don't need to go through all of that to get kids like this out on the streets. All they need is social media that rewards these kids by rigging the algorithm to favor any post that is pro-protest, or an image or something of your exploits during the protest. So when these kids are doing this violence, they videotape themselves, they post it on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram, and the algorithm is rigged to boost that post, and they will just keep coming back. It's as good as inviting them to the White House. It's overnight fame that they have thanks to social media, and it costs the US nothing to give them that. It's just rigging social media in favor of the protests, incentivizing going out and protesting. And then everyone probably knows what happens to you if you try to speak up against the protests. Facebook and Twitter will ban you. I'm suspended off of Facebook and Twitter. I have one Facebook account left that I don't use for anything, and that's it. Everything else has been deleted permanently, and I cannot make a new one. If I make a new one, it'll just instantly block me on my IP. If I get a new IP, all of my enemies will report me, and in one day I'll be off. So this is what Facebook and Twitter do. They rig it, and they create incentives for these people to come out constantly. This is how they get their loyalty to the cause. And it's, when you really think about it, they have no idea why they're out there protesting. They're just doing it to get more clicks and likes, to get more notoriety. They don't even understand what they're out there for. If you ask some of them, they will even tell you. There's a famous viral clip from like a week or two ago where a journalist for the opposition was interviewing one of the protesters, and he was saying how he's just out there because it's fun. His friends are out there. He gets a lot of attention on social media. And you could see how frustrated this opposition reporter was, because she was trying to get him to be like, I'm out here for democracy and the freedom and my country's future. And he didn't say any of that. He showed how low level the understanding is of the people actually out there protesting. And it's easy to vilify these protesters, but they're being used, they're being exploited, they're cannon fodder for the opposition, which is led by a billionaire and backed by foreign governments.
Yeah, I like to point out the hypocrisy of the West. It's what we call, I think, reverse accusation. I mean, basically accuse other countries of what you are doing yourself. The same, like Russia, when, this whole thing about Russia meddling. It's interesting. I draw the parallel of Hong Kong. Remember Mark Rubio going to Hong Kong and actually fueling the protests and saying, well, you need to fight the CCP and so on, demonizing China. I mean, how much of an interference is that? I draw the parallel of, imagine Chinese politicians going to the US during the BLM protest and saying, oh, you need to overthrow your government. It is like having ships, army ships from the UK and the US being in South China Sea and saying that China is aggressive. Imagine China having ships going to Cuba. Imagine that, It's just disgusting hypocrisy, You
don't have to imagine it, Angelo, because the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviet Union was working with Cuba because, and people never put this into proper context, the US already put nukes in Turkey. And so the Soviet Union approaching Cuba, this was as retaliation to kind of balance the equation. And the US did not tolerate anyone being in Cuba, did not tolerate the Soviet Union being in Cuba. So you could see the double, you don't have to guess that there would be a double standard. It is a double standard. The US does not tolerate it, and yet they do it to everyone else. So you see, they're fighting with police, they got their three fingers, there's not nearly enough of them, and there hasn't been for well over a year for them to overwhelm these barricades. They use these shipping containers. In the past, they have torn down these shipping containers. We might still see that today, where they tear down the shipping container. And how deliberate is it, the protesters dismantling these barricades to get at the police so that they can fight them? The police are behind the barricades, and then the protesters tear the barricades down to get to the police. It really is just so cut and dry how obvious who is driving the violence. And then to watch, it's surreal to watch the headlines today and tomorrow, watching social media today, and then reading the headlines tomorrow and the BBC, Reuters. It's surreal. And one other thing to point out is, I mean, the BBC here in Thailand and Reuters, the Thai people they have working with them at Reuters, they're part of the opposition. They are part of the opposition. They are not journalists. So that's really important to keep in mind, why they're so biased, why they can watch the protesters cause violence and then the next day spin it 180 degrees around and pin it all on the police. And then Amnesty International claiming that the police are attacking children because they're 14, 15, 16 years old. By the way, you're 14, 15, 16 years old, you're not even allowed to vote. You can't vote. So why are they out there demanding the government step down or talking about rewriting the Constitution? or reforming the constitutional monarchy. They didn't even finish school. What do they know about any of these things? The reality is they know nothing about it. And again, this is the opposition, billionaires and their Western backers, fighting this fight through these kids because they know the propaganda value of police cracking down on underage minors. They understand that fully. And they're putting these kids in danger deliberately to do this.
I think it's also the power of Hollywood. I mean, kids, they watch those Hollywood movies, and it's funny how you see those Hollywood movies having, the U.S. empire can massacre people, but at the end of the movie, it must still look good. It must still look like a legitimate movement, while in reality, it's suppressing 3/4 of the world, the global South.
We'll get back to the live feed. We're doing live feed of the violent riots in Bangkok, this US-backed mob. I just want to show you, this is Amnesty International Thailand, and this is them saying, Thailand, children rights to protest, and their rights must be protected. Could you imagine being a human rights organization and encouraging children to go out into the streets and participate in these kind of protests and saying it's their right to do it, and leave them alone and let them do it? Could you imagine if you actually cared about these kids, you would be telling them, stay off the streets. This is a political fight between two parties. Very wealthy, influential people are involved in this. Don't get involved. But no, they're like, go out and do this. It's your right. And we're here to protect you. Amnesty had a squad called Child in Mob, where they would go out and monitor the children and make sure they didn't catch like a rubber bullet to the abdomen or something. And then if they did, they would be right there to report on it. I mean, they're essentially using kids as human shields, these underage minors as cannon fodder, and they're setting it up so they could document anything at all that happens to them as leverage against the government.
It's interesting how this freedom of speech and protest works in the West. So basically, you saw the BLM movement. They were out in the street destroying property and so on. So you can protest and you can say whatever you want in the West. I mean, relatively, but the government won't listen to you. I mean, what did the BLM movement get? I mean, what they got is that maybe they destroy some statues or they rename some streets. But in reality, Western-style democracies don't listen to you. It's just a facade, I see some actions here. The police is actually charging towards the protesters.
Yeah, I mean, you see how small that group is. The police almost always outnumber the protesters now. We watched the protesters throwing explosives at the police. They got the fire hose out. They're going to try to clear them out. Actually, this is not a fire truck. This is a crowd control truck. It's designed specifically.
They have actually colored liquid. So basically, the protesters, they get some stain colored, and they can catch the protesters later, as a proof that they were in the protest, right?
That would be nice if they do that. That would be nice, because that's what needs to happen. I mean, this has been going on and on and on daily. They're causing damage. They're hurting people. They should be arrested. The police should be rounding them up and arresting them. And if they did, you would see this end, because we see how few people come out. And it's the same people coming out every single time. So it's easy to blame the opposition in many ways. The people tying maybe the goal here is to be as patient as possible and to prove to the public that they tried all options, and it really is the opposition that insists on making this an issue. It's hard to tell. I'm not at the meeting. I'm not sitting at the meeting at the table when they're coming up with the strategy. But like I said, that the government is between a rock and a hard place. If they do the right thing and arrest them, and it's for the kids' own good, the human rights groups will scream human rights abuses, get them back out on the streets as fast as possible. A U.S. NED-funded group, Thai Lawyers for Human Rights, that's all they exist to do is, well, they help lead the protests, and then they try to get the protesters out of jail back on the streets as fast as possible. And they get US government money to do that. So they have a bottomless pit of money to pay bail and get these kids out of jail and the leaders and anyone arrested and get them back out on the streets as quick as possible. This is what the US government created this front to do, to protect the people agitating in Thailand, agitating for US interests in Thailand, to protect them from legal repercussions. Like I said, there's an NGO law that the Thai government is trying to pass. And we already hear all of these US-funded NGOs that swore up and down that they weren't funded by the US government. Now they're complaining that they won't be able to do their work because they depend on the US government for their funding, because they don't get funded by no one in Thailand pays for their nonsense, which, again, you're a pro-democracy NGO, and the people you claim you're fighting for don't care enough about your work to support it. What does that tell you? Okay, so what we're watching now, this is live. People who are just joining us now, this is live in Bangkok. This is the intersection the violent US-backed protesters are always confronting the police at. You can see the police are backing off now. So they went after the protesters, and now they're backing off again. And you'll watch, the protesters will come back into this area. And it demonstrates that the protesters aren't just out to peacefully protest, they're out to fight the police. They will follow the police wherever they go to go fight them. They are determined to create violence. This is what they're out there for.
You mentioned, Brian, you mentioned just before that there's a fund, and basically this fund is backed by the US, funded by the US, that actually pays the legal bills, medical bills of the protesters. So basically it's an incentive for the protesters. I will go protest and destroy. Was an equivalent fund in Hong Kong. The size of the fund was $30 million US. I mean, you can go a long way with $30 million US. The name was called the 612 Fund. They're actually dismantling the fund now. So you see, it's an incentive. When you know that you are going to, if you protest and you are going to destroy property, if you know that you are going to pay bills and it's going to be fines and so on, it makes a huge difference. So you see, there are all those incentives that make those people to go into the streets.
Yes, and look at this one. Twitter launches freedom of expression search prompt in Thailand, and it's hashtag there is help. And who did they recruit to provide help to anyone? Because what Twitter's saying, if you want to criminally defame the head of state of Thailand on Twitter, you can, because it's not against our laws or regulations, it's against Thai law. And if you get in trouble, contact Thai Lawyers for Human Rights, which is funded by the US government and will pay for your legal bills, and iLaw, which is also, that was the one we were talking about, funded by the US government, trying to rewrite the Thai constitution. So yes, you can see how the US government is extending this protection to encourage people to come out and break the law. That's what they're doing. That's what we're seeing here. And now we see violence. This is violence that the US-backed opposition is carrying out. And all of these fake NGOs funded by the US government are going to come out and help them if and when they get arrested. And you see that, they're taunting the police. They're fighting with the police. They're not being chased. They're not peacefully protesting and being chased by the police. They're looking for trouble. And we were just talking about this during the car mob. Someone asked, why are there so many motorcycles? It's because that's the cannon fodder. They're going to get offloaded from the main protests, and they're going to go create violence, try to create some martyrs.
You want to check at some questions, some remarks? There's some.
I'm going to take a look here.
Democracy is a tool used to subvert a country. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you need to. I mean, if it's controlled, if it's financed by Western imperialist entities, then yes, I mean, you can subvert a country easily.
I mean, you have to think about. Well, you have to think about what democracy is in the US. It's a system of control. No matter who you vote into power, the corporations still make all of the decisions, and the politicians, the elections are just to keep Americans fighting with each other. So they never realize that the election is not giving them control of anything. It's controlling them. And then when the US sponsors democracy promotion overseas, it's them extending that same system of control over an entire other nations. So in Myanmar, people said the elections weren't rigged, the ballots weren't rigged. It's true, they weren't. The Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy blew the military party out of the water in 2 elections, no doubt about it. But how? There's more than one way to rig an election. The U.S. was dumping millions upon millions of dollars into the coffers of these political parties so they could out-campaign anyone in that country. They tilted the game board in favor of the opposition that they wanted in power. And then it didn't matter how many elections you had, they would beat anyone in that country. There was no way for anyone else to win. So that is another way of rigging a country. And yes, it's pretending to be democracy, but it's actually a form of foreign interference and control extended from the US over an entire other country, Myanmar in that case. That's why the military had to throw Aung San Suu Kyi out.
It all comes down always to sovereignty. I mean, this is the foundation. This is what we are focusing on, is always, is there sovereignty? Is the sovereignty being protected? In some cases, it can be very counterintuitive, but when you have militaries taking over, they are doing this not out of pleasure. They're doing this out of preservation of national sovereignty. This is the last entity in a country that actually can do that. If the police cannot do its job, it's overwhelmed, then there's the military. And again, that's the last entity that can protect the sovereignty.
Absolutely. And it was the same for the 2 military coups that I have experienced since being in Thailand. 2006 was ousting Thaksin Shinawatra, and 2014 was ousting Thaksin Shinawat's sister, Yingluck Shinawatra. I mean, people say that the opposition represents Western-style democracy. No, it's cartoonish third world corruption where you have a brother and sister trying to run the country. Thaksin Shinawat's brother-in-law at one point was prime minister. It was a complete joke. It was something that you would make up for a movie script for like a political comedy or something. So now we're watching, like, this is deja vu. I mean, it's like the same exact intersection where, remember, Angelo, we were watching watching the journalists go here to watch the protesters fight with the police. It's the same thing, and this will go on from now until probably like 10 or 11 p.m. and the police will chase them all throughout Dindang area, where it's a lot of residential areas in there, like housing projects and stuff, and it will just disrupt everybody there, endanger everybody there. There will be injuries, and because the protesters, you see, they've come here throwing explosives. God knows what else they have on them, and what will unfold as the day goes on. Hopefully, no one gets seriously hurt or dies. But that's what they're trying to do.
You mentioned before, Brian, the hijacking of democracy. I think Myanmar is probably the most blatant example. When you had Aung San Suu Kyi, she was groomed by the West, and then she had 3 advisors, foreigners, being constantly with her, telling her what to do. And the main focus was rewrite the constitution, just make sure that because in the current constitution in Myanmar, the military has a veto power. If you want to rewrite the constitution, you need to have 75% at least of votes to rewrite the constitution. And according to the current constitution in Myanmar, the military hold 25% of power in the chambers. So their focus was constitution, so the rule of the game, and also disrupt the Belt and Road Initiative. So you have close advisors that are telling you exactly, I mean, just do whatever you can just to disrupt the Belt and Road Initiative. And the smart thing that the military did was that they put the Belt and Road Initiative project under the national security umbrella. So they were monitored directly by the militaries. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a single project of Belt and Road Initiative that would go ahead. So are you, Aung San Suu Kyi, were you working for your country, or were you just working for the US? I mean, that's
it's pretty obvious. I mean, she had she had handlers basically running the country for her. And when I say handlers, I mean British and Australian citizens rewriting the Constitution, devising trade policy, domestic economic policy, and some guy that was literally working for the the UK Foreign Office while also serving as Aung San Suu Kyi's advisor. So I mean, they had her all but on a leash, and dragging her around the country to run the country. It was like a British viceroy all over again. And again, that's why the Myanmar military, you don't have to like everything that they do, but they had to do that because they were being recolonized. So you see these people, they're throwing stuff. There was a slingshot. You know, they're engaging in violence with the police. When you're throwing explosives or bottles or petrol bombs at the police under international regulations regarding less than lethal force, they're allowed to shoot rubber bullets back at you. This guy with the slingshot, I mean, that he's got a glass marble or a steel ball bearing, or like a very heavy duty bolt or something, and that's what he's shooting at the police. And that can do as much damage as a rubber bullet. And it is proportionate for the police to fire back at this line of violent individuals. And you can see how the press is intermingling with the protesters, and the police repeatedly tell the press to get out of the way because they're going to fire rubber bullets. And then the press will get hit by rubber bullets because they ignore the police, and then they accuse the police of deliberately targeting the press. And like I said, the press, more or less, are part of the opposition. A lot of them are not there to objectively observe. They're there to continue trying to make a case against the Thai government and the Thai police and ignore the violence that these protesters are eagerly participating in.
Yeah, just to go back to Myanmar, remember, I mean, these days they're actually arresting Radio Free Asia and actually BBC correspondent there. Well, because at some point they were those media were calling for insurrection. Radio Free Asia is the propaganda arm of the US. It's under the umbrella of USAGM, and the yearly budget is $1 billion. It's all in propaganda. It's not about information. It's about propaganda. So when it came to Myanmar, they were calling for insurrection. I mean, imagine the opposite in the US. I mean, even doing just 1% of what they're doing, they would go to jail for 20 years. I mean, would be the national security laws in the US. I mean, people don't know that, but you know, they're much tougher, and there are plenty. You know, the Patriot Act is one of them, but it's much harsher. You don't want to be caught by national security laws in the US. You see, those are water cannons with the liquid, tainted liquid. So basically, what they can do is that because they're playing hide and seek right now. You know, it's a bit the tactics they had in Hong Kong. They called it bee water. So basically, it's a hide and seek. They're harassing the police and then they're running. So what they do here with this water cannon is there's a liquid with the color, and then maybe they can catch those protesters if they have colors on their clothes.
Absolutely. And in the past, they have used kind of like an irritant mixed in with the water to kind of serve kind of the same purpose of tear gas to help disperse the protests. I'm not sure if they've used this dye or not, but I have not seen them use it recently. This is the first time recently I've seen them use it. So hopefully they do. They can arrest a whole bunch of them. I mean, it's just the same group every single time. And if you were to put them all behind bars, you know, honestly, I'm not in charge of anything. This is for Thai people to sort out. But what I would really like is, so this guy's going to complain about getting some of the dye on him. You know, like what you're there covering a violent protest. What do you think is going to happen? What was I saying before that guy interrupted me?
There's actually another. I'm sending you another link. It seems like Thai rats they're covering also. They might.
Yeah, let me check that one out.
Yeah. So basically, they're doing this in different part of the city. I just wonder if they might copy what they did in Hong Kong. So if you want to create a disruption, you do this in different part of the city, and so you spread the police force. This might be one of the techniques they might copy from Hong Kong protesters.
Yeah. So hard to tell where. I'm not exactly sure where this is.
That's far from the center. Huh? That's the outskirts. So they probably
This,
they might drive to the center, I guess.
it's possible. It's probably just gonna have to wait and see. Let's switch back to. We'll keep an eye on this one.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can put this one over here and watch this one at the same time as this one.
Yeah.
Because it's important to watch this right here, this part where the protesters are eagerly engaging in violence with the police. The police are trying to hold their ground. This guy, like police will get hurt too, and the media won't ever talk about that. They'll only ever talk about when protesters get hurt. Sometimes the protesters are hurting each other. Because like I said, some of these are like rival school gangs that fight each other anyway, and then they will fight each other during the protests, almost without fail, almost every single time. And they'll hurt each other, or they'll shoot each other, and they'll say, "What was that? The police using live rounds? We can see what the police are doing. We can see what the police are doing." And so this is the danger of having your information space controlled by foreigners and by foreign-backed opposition groups. Let me take a peek at this other thing. What's going on here? They just seem to be parked on an overpass. This kind of looks like in the north of the city, Nantamburi. The other protesters we saw, they just kind of gathered on the overpass, kind of blocking traffic. That's another thing they complain about what the government is doing to the Thai people, but really the imposition on Thai people comes from these constant protests. When they're blocking roads, people have to get from point A to point B, and they can't because they got to pass all of this. Schools. Yes, I'm talking, people that are just joining us, I see this comment from Lou is schools. I'm talking about vocational schools in Thailand. Not all of them, but there are some notorious vocational schools where the students have these extremely deadly, violent rivalries with one another, where they will kill each other with machetes and guns and throw explosives at each other. They'll attack each other while they're on public transportation and injure or kill bystanders. That's the same group that we see here in the streets fighting with police right now. The same group. And because this has been going on for about a year, there have been instances where they have started fighting during the protest with each other, throwing bombs at each other during the protest. And again, you don't know about any of this because the Western media never reports any of this.
Yeah, it's good that we remind people that people that are joining us during the live show. So basically, this is the initiative of those protests are the red shirts. Brian, that's correct. So
yes.
The red shirts are backed by Thaksin Shinawatra. He used to be in politics in Thailand, and now he's in exile because he's supposed to face justice in Thailand. So he's a billionaire. Can you give a little bit the background? So he was in a Carlyle group, so private equity firm, and when he was in power, he was actually, can I call a U.S. puppet? Not yet, but I mean, there was a strong influence by the U.S. when he was in power. There was actually the time where Thailand joined the Iraqi war, right?
Yes, absolutely. Before he got into politics, he was a very corrupt police colonel. And so it's funny that the opposition now is trying to demand police reform when their leaders started his career as a corrupt police colonel. What he did was he set up a computer company, and then he sold himself as a police colonel and the police department computers. This is the kind of things he would do to make his money. He was an advisor or an associate of the Carlyle Group, this US-based equity firm linked to the US President George Bush and his circle and his cabinet. And he vowed that when he became prime minister that he would use his position to help play matchmaker between US equity firms and Thai assets. So, I mean, that's the kind of guy he was. He didn't nationalize, he privatized Thailand's national petroleum concern, PTT. And this is something that Thai people want to undo, but it's very difficult. Once it's privatized, you will have all kinds of problems when you try to nationalize it again, once you invite in these foreign investors. And he sent troops to Iraq. He waged a war on drugs in 2003 that killed 1,800 people over the course of 90 days. That's about 20 people a day dead, extrajudicially executed in the streets. And he restarted violence in the deep, deep south, these 3 provinces in Thailand's deep south bordering near Malaysia. And that was after a 20-year enduring peace. He got that reignited. And so what he was a prime minister who presided over the 2 bloodiest, most murderous chapters in Thailand's history. And as you can see, he's not done yet. He's got these protesters out there. Thanathorn Juangroongruangkit, he's another billionaire, not a self-made billionaire. His parents handed him his wealth, and he works directly with Thaksin Shinawatra. Their political headquarters are literally next door to each other on Phetpari Road in Bangkok, in the capital, the 2 buildings side by side. And Thaksin's Pheu Thai party nominated Thanathorn as their candidate for prime minister during the 2019 general elections, which they lost. But it just goes to show you that Thanathorn is part of this effort to get the opposition, the US-backed opposition in general, back into power. So it's either Thaksin or Thanathorn. They're kind of hedging their bet, I guess you could say, because Thaksin getting back into Thailand is very difficult. He has at least 2 prison sentences he faces and a backlog of legal cases that he still has to face if he ever comes back to Thailand, barring any sort of amnesty deal.
Yeah, we need to be aware also of the hijacking of the self-proclaimed socialist movement. So they are backing a movement that they call it socialist, but that's a billionaire that was actually selling state-owned assets. It's the same as Macron. Remember, Macron was a finance minister under socialist government, but this is the hijacking. It's a government that's been selling lots of state-owned assets. And who was he selling to? To the friends he was working with when he was in Rothschild Bank. It's the same thing as the revolving door. What is revolving door is politicians that go back and forth from public office to private entities, and they're just helping each other, their friends. So it's a delayed corruption. So I'm in politics right now, and then once I'm out, you are going to pay me back. And this is why you have politicians like in the US, like Pelosi, she's worth $140 million US. Mitt Romney, $200 million US. Biden is around $67 million US. I mean, are those governments by the people for the people? No, they're not. And what gets me really angry here when it comes to Thailand is that you have those billionaires that are stealing the state, stealing the people, and they launch a movement, self-proclaimed socialist, and it's not socialism. They're being misled. They're being misled. This is not socialism. So it's important for especially Westerners that watch Thailand. It's very counterintuitive when you think, well, Thailand is a king, so that is not a government by the people. Well, no, they need to understand that the king has uniting force for the country, and it's very counterintuitive. It has nothing to do with the kings we have in mind and the British Empire or French monarchy. It's very different. Can you give us maybe more information? You've been in Thailand for a long time. What is your opinion about the king in Thailand?
Absolutely. So this is the biggest problem. Western observers of Thailand, they see the monarchy and they just say, no, I don't like it. And you see a lot of, I call fake or lazy lefties who see a king, or they're like very hardcore socialist or even communist, and they see a king and they're automatically against the king because of this dogma that they adhere to. They don't know anything at all about the Thai monarchy as an institution or the current Thai king. They know nothing about him or the institution except for what they've read in the Western media, the same media that told us about WMDs in Iraq, or Assad gassing his own people, all of these lies, verified lies now. So Western monarchies oversaw empires that expanded beyond their borders, oppressed and exploited people around the globe. Thailand's monarchy for centuries united the country and protected it from those empires, from those Western monarchies trying to take over the planet. Thailand is the only country in Southeast Asia that was never colonized by the West. All of Thailand's neighbors were colonized to their east by France, and to their west and south by Britain. And so people need to keep all of that in mind. It's a monarchy superficially, but you have to really look at its history and its relationship to the Thai people, and how this has played out and how it has developed over time, and look past the superficiality and look past your own personal political proclivities, because a lot of times that's going to blind you. That's not going to be a lens that helps you see the world clearly. It's going to cloud things up. If you want to find the truth, you have to be objective, and you cannot have a lens that you're looking through when you're trying to be objective. And so why is the Western media attacking the monarchy now? This should be like the biggest red flag for anyone observing Thailand and its political crisis right now. Why is a US-backed protest attacking the monarchy? Why is the BBC smearing Thailand's monarchy? Why do they smear or attack anyone? It's because it's a targeted nation. They're trying to undermine something that makes Thailand strong and united so that they could divide and destroy it like they've done to so many other countries. Just in recent history, just since the 21st century, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Ukraine. We were talking about Ukraine. What have they been doing all throughout? Oh, okay, so now they've got some fires going. That is something that they've always got to get going. The protesters, big fans of arson. So people need to ask themselves, if they heard something bad about the Thai monarchy, where did they hear it? And is that the first thing the BBC or Reuters has told the truth about? Because they lie about everything else. Why wouldn't they also be lying about this? But if you actually have a question you want to know about the Thai monarchy, what the truth is about a particular issue, just feel free to ask. I'd be more than happy to answer it. I'm someone who came from the outside. I was not born in Thailand. I was not raised or educated in Thailand. My respect and admiration for Thailand's institutions comes from a genuine understanding of it, but being an outsider and learning about it on my own. People actually will notice I have a book behind me with King Rama IX on it, the father of the current king. He spent his life, decades, as king of Thailand, and he went to every corner of this country. Everywhere you go, you see projects that continue to this day, even after he passed away, where he has helped build people up, build communities up, to be self-sufficient, to own their own property, to build wealth sustainably. And by the way, a lot of people say, well, his son, what about his son? His son was always with him everywhere he went during all those years. You always see him in the background with these groups that the king went out to the countryside with to go help these people. That's where he was. He also spent a lot of time working on those projects. And all those projects are ongoing right now in Thailand. So, I mean, this was... This is the truth versus what the BBC and the opposition will say. A lot of the people in the opposition, like people like Kanatom, they're wannabes. They're jealous. They're jealous that they think that they're geniuses and their genius is not being recognized. And they resent the fact that so many Thai people respect the Thai monarchy. They think they deserve that respect and that admiration. And in reality, they don't. So here we go with the petrol bombs. I mean, it's like, Angelo, didn't I say that this was what they were going to, it's like I could predict the future. I said they were going to do all of this, and here they are doing it in front of us live. People that are just joining us, we're watching live in Bangkok, the US-backed opposition eagerly engaging in violence with the police. The police have repeatedly backed off, and the protesters continue advancing with petrol bombs, explosives, bricks, bottles, anything that they brought with them or can find. They're throwing at the police. They're burning things.
Yeah.
Arson.
Yeah. Brian, I just want to, you said something which is, which I agree 100% with you, is you've been in Thailand for a long time, and you when you came in, you had your Western lenses, and I think whenever those lenses are very important for people to understand that whenever we judge from a past, from a background, from a culture perspective. So what happens that we have a biased lenses. So this is what happened to me when I came here to China 25 years ago. I came with my background, with my ideology. This is something which runs deep inside. Our education is Western education, and here we arrive in Asia and with a completely different history and background, and it takes time for us to start seeing from a different perspective. And ultimately, the most objective view when it comes to Thailand or China, it's Thai people, Thai lenses and Chinese lenses, because Westerners, who are we? We're not superior just to be able to tell Thai people what is the good system for them, or Chinese people what is the good system for them. I want to go back to what we said when we were talking about you were talking about monarchy. We can read this.
Just one moment. There's Sam Liu, who said the ex-king was good, but not the son. And so my question is, why? Why isn't the current king, King Rama X, why is he not good? Because I have not seen the opposition hates the Thai king, the current Thai king, but they have never made a case about why he is bad. The only thing that they can do is talk about baseless rumors about his private life. There's nothing about his public life that they can cite. Now, the one thing that they always do say is, oh, Thai taxes go to the Thai king. Well, there's a small amount of Thai taxes. It's like not even 1% of the national budget. And it goes to the Thai king, all Thai kings, for performing their duties as head of state. And even if you got rid of the Thai monarchy, you would still have a Thai head of state who would require that budget to perform their duties. And when we talk about this budget, it's going to staff that work for things like security, setting things up, driving, whatever. These are jobs. These are Thai people that have jobs. They're getting paid a salary. That money's going back into the Thai economy. It's not like he's taking it he's just walking around with bags of money from Thai taxpayers. It's not like that. So, I mean, if you're going to say the Thai king is not good, tell me why. Tell me where you heard that, and what the source is, and why you believe that source, especially if it's something like the BBC or Reuters, who told us about WMDs in Iraq, or Assad gassing his own people, or Russia rigging the elections in 2016 and 2020, and wanting Trump in power instead of Joe Biden, who's demented. I mean, why wouldn't you want a demented walking corpse running the country of your supposed enemy? Why wouldn't you want that? So nothing that they say makes any sense. And so why would this be the first thing you believed when you read it from them? Yeah, I'm just curious what we're talking about when we say the current king is not good. Why not? I don't understand. I would like to hear what people think that the king is doing, why they think he's bad versus his father. I mean, he helped his father all of those years. You have to understand that the previous king, King Rama IX, was king for decades. He passed away when he was in his 80s. I mean, there were people who were born, lived their lives, and died in Thailand while he was king. That was a long time. And the current Thai king, he's already kind of an older gentleman. He doesn't have a whole reign ahead of him. There's just so much that he can do right now. And he is keeping up with everything that his father had done. Is all those projects are ongoing. So I'm just curious. Sorry for the tirade.
No,
there.
no, no. I agree. Actually, he doesn't have the lavish lifestyle they pretending he has. I mean, when he goes, he does some trips sometimes to Bavaria, and they keep on saying, well, he's outside of Thailand and so on. But he doesn't have a lavish lifestyle when he goes there, and so it's just all these lies. They're associating him being a king as the kings of and the princes of Saudi Arabia, which are the ones actually stealing the government and the people. The only thing he's doing is just performing his duty as a head of state, and it's not nothing close. I mean, it's similar to what the British the Queen is doing. This is those role need to be performed by the head of state, nothing else. That's what he's doing.
And the current Thai king, like I said, he's an older gentleman. He has a younger son who is going to school in Germany, and this is not unheard of. Thai monarchies have always sent princes abroad to study, to expand their worldview. And so he wanted to be with his son because, like I said, he's an older man, and so he wanted to be with his son. I don't see what the problem is, and what's paradoxical here is that the opposition will claim the king is abusing he has too many powers, needs to be reined in under the constitution, even though it's literally a constitutional monarchy. But then they're complaining that he's in Germany, he's not in Thailand doing things. It just makes no sense, and it just goes to show you, no matter what the Thai king does, they're going to find a reason to complain. They will even simultaneously complain about two opposite narratives that don't even work together. So it's bizarre. I don't know what to say. You tell a lie often enough, people will believe it. But it's sad that in 2021, people still read the BBC or see a BBC report or read Khao News, knowing or maybe not knowing that the opposition, the billionaire family of Thanaton, owns Khao Martychon, and they entertain these things. They spread these lies. They repeat these lies deliberately.
Yeah, it's interesting how when you compare with the British monarchy, how much censorship there is when it comes to affairs related to the British monarchy. I mean, we saw this. Who was it? The prince, one of the prince that had a relationship with Epstein, right? Like related to pedophilia.
Yes.
Well, the British media, I mean, are they digging into this? There's no coverage at all. So here it's just pure hypocrisy here.
And I kind of want to point something else out too. Okay, well, I mean, people can pick where they want to study, and it's up to them. It's not up to Judy Krusk where the Thai prince studies. And traditionally, Thailand's monarchy has sent princes abroad to study. I mean, it's just like something that if you want to be a statesman, you have to learn about statesmanship, and that requires going overseas. You can't be sheltered in Bangkok your whole life and then be head of state and run your duties as head of state. You cannot do it. So, I mean, again, we're going to talk about democracy out of one side of our mouth, and then we're going to dictate where everyone should be allowed to go to school or not go to school. I just thought, again, that doesn't make any sense. There's always people that are going to complain. I accept that. I understand that. I just wanted to make a point about Angelo. You were saying about the British monarchy. You're allowed to criticize the British monarchy because they're not worried. They know where their base of power is. They're not worried about the stability of the UK. Thailand has to worry because the Thai monarchy is what holds Thai people together. And if they're able to crack that and create fault lines, they can divide and destroy Thailand. This is what the West has done to all of Thailand's neighbors. All of Thailand's neighbors are playing catch up, including Vietnam, which has a larger population but a smaller GDP than Thailand. Thailand has the second largest economy in ASEAN, second only to Indonesia, which has something like 200 million. This is a very large population. So, I mean,
I want,
like for Judy, I'm just gonna, because I hear this all the time. I'm just so tired of the same thing over and over again about the Thai constitution, or no, the German constitution says the Thai king cannot rule from Germany. So again, it's this paradox. He's not ruling. He's not doing anything in Thailand. He's in Thailand. He's doing too much. It's like two separate arguments at the same time. It's boring. Okay, Angelo, go ahead.
No, just one more thing. I mean, important to put to tell us, so the people that with the contribution of the king in Thailand. Thailand has never been colonized because the king was there to unite the people and to deal with foreign powers. So that is one of the contribution of the king when it comes to, and the monarchy when it comes to Thai politics. So the king has how many years? Like 700 years, and never was Thailand colonized, while all the neighbors were colonized because they didn't have a unifying force like the king.
Exactly, or they did, but they managed to find some kind of fault line, and they were able to crack it. They were able to do then what they're trying to do right now with the monarchy. So someone else said about the Thai king wearing weird clothes. I mean, this is I don't know if those pictures have been verified. Even if they did, his private life. Who cares? What about his public service as head of state? Where's the actual criticism of what the Thai king does in his role as head of state? Like you dig into anyone's personal life, you might find things that some people might find questionable or not, but that's their private life. What does that have to do with their public life? Again, and a lot of these protesters, they're lefty liberals who think everything should be okay to do, except when someone they don't like does it, and then suddenly it's not okay. So there's a lot of problems with those stories. And again, the Western media, we've caught the BBC photoshopping pictures from China to make the trees go from green to gray. So if they're going to doctor photos about China, what wouldn't they do? What wouldn't the Western media do to lie and smear a targeted country? So again, I just don't understand why people are going for this when otherwise they see through the lies, like about Iraq or Syria or Afghanistan or Xinjiang. But then when they hear something about Thailand, they're like, I believe that. Why? Why would you believe that?
Yeah, it's just amazing how people can be lied for so long, over and over. All those wars being waged out of lies, and they keep on falling for those lies. I mean, after weapon of mass destruction lies, you fall for more lies. I mean, Xinjiang lies, where you have the same actors being paid. Again, those actors, they are promised a refugee status in the US, and then later on, the more lies they tell, the higher pay they get. Every speeches those so-called dissidents they give, they get in tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, it's money. It's just money. I mean, people are led by money. So the first promise is refugee status. Many of those kids, they want to live in the US. They have the dream of living in the US. There's a different reality when they get there, and then they are led by money. They're being hijacked. They started with a lie, and they keep staying in that lie over and over forever. There's this dissident, Liu Xiaobo. He was in 1989 in Tiananmen Square, and they gave him the Nobel Peace Prize. But look at his position. His position is constantly pro-war, pro-US war. He was a strong supporter of Iraqi invasion. And we are talking about Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize, Liu Xiaobo. It's like they start with the lie, and they hijack by the lie. You have sometimes some of them backtrack a little bit. Like there's a case of Dalai Lama. He's been hijacked for decades, and his brother wrote a book saying, well, one of the biggest regrets of the Dalai Lama was that he accepted money from the CIA. And because once you accept money from the CIA, you are hijacked, and you cannot backtrack.
Cannot.
the telephone of the Dalai Lama was taped under the Pegasus project. Why? Because he's being hijacked. He cannot do whatever he wants. He's being hijacked, and if it was for him, I want to believe that actually he would love to have a relationship with China, and talk again to the Chinese government. So the next actually challenge when it comes to Dalai Lama will be the succession. Historically, the succession of the Dalai Lama was always, in the region, in Tibet, they would find a succession. I wouldn't be surprised that they find a successor in the US. I mean,
well, this has actually been an issue, the succession, and how the U.S. is trying to say China has no say in it, which is just so ridiculous. What the protesters are doing now, I don't know if people caught that, but there was a journalist who put himself between the police line and a protester with a shield, who was accompanied by another protester who was going to probably throw an explosive at the police. So this is how the journalists end up getting hit by rubber bullets, because they're intermingling with violent protesters and ignoring police warnings not to do so, because they're trying to hurt police. The police have to respond, and the journalists are deliberately putting themselves between the police and the protesters and making targets out of themselves. This is probably Prawit here in the hard hat from Khalsa English, the house Thai who thinks he's a white guy. He's right there.
I'm surprised he's not doing selfies. He loves, because that's all about himself. I hope he's listening to us, but this guy is a huge ego. It's all about himself, and I really believe that he dreams he was a white guy and not an Asian guy. I think he's a self-hater Asian, really. He's the one telling people that they shouldn't eat Chinese food. They should eat hot dog and hamburgers. Can you imagine how stupid, how ridiculous is that? Especially knowing the deep history ties between Thailand and China. There's a huge Chinese population in Thailand, as well as Thai minorities in China. There's a minority called the Daizu in northern China, Xishuangbanna, and actually some historians, Thai historians. I have a friend who's a Thai historian working in Bangkok. Well, they say that probably there's a possibility that the origin of Thai people come from the area of Xishuangbanna, northern Thailand. So
okay. This looks like a very I don't know what that guy's got, but I mean, there's some significant flame coming out of it. And they're advancing on static police lines. The police are not advancing on that. They're not. This is not self-defensive. This is offensive, going after the police. Go ahead, Angelo. Just we got to keep an eye on.
Let's see what they're doing. But it's a constant provocation. But the sad thing is that tomorrow, the headlines of Western media will be, oh, how aggressive, how is the police towards the protesters. And when you look at this, those are just thugs. They're just thugs. When you talk about, how many are there? We're talking about a few hundreds. But that's how it starts. We need to be very cautious. Those movements can escalate. So what we want to do here is highlight the violence and also educate people about the background of those protests. Are they grassroots protests? Who are they backed? Is there funding? Is there foreign meddling? And what we're doing, you and I, is just exposing the foreign meddling behind this. There's an agenda behind this, and it's related to China, US. Is a US-China proxy war here. It's a small scale, but it's important to look at the context of the whole Southeast Asia, a possible Asian Spring. And it's important to cover this just to educate people. Be careful, careful. What happened in the Arab Spring might happen in the whole region. We saw this in Hong Kong. We saw this in Myanmar. Thailand's the same pattern. And it's all under the umbrella of the Milk Tea Alliance that covers different countries: Malaysia, Myanmar, Thailand. Taiwan, India also is also fighting against China. So it's important just to expose that.
Okay, a couple. I'm gonna finish up on the current Thai king. I see Hang Tuah here. I disagree with you, Brian. He should be a role model for his citizens. Again, these pictures of him with wearing strange clothes or having tattoos, or these stories came from who? It came from the opposition. The story about the Thai king having tattoos was originally being spread by Andrew McGregor Marshall. This is a verified liar. He lied for 6 years and said, I was Michael Persh. He said, Tony Cartolucci is Michael Persh. He had sources. He had IP addresses that proved it. And I'm not Michael Persh. I'm Brian Berletic. He was a liar. He's just a liar. He makes stuff up. And he made up that the Thai king had tattoos. When it turned out that he didn't have tattoos, Andrew McGregor Marshall backtracked and said, well, they were temporary tattoos, because he's a liar. He's making this up. We don't even know if those are real pictures or if they're doctored or not. Hang also says he should be a role model. Well, the Thai king, say there's a flood, a natural disaster, or during this current health and economic crisis, the king is using his personal resources to distribute aid among the Thai people, and using the military also to help distribute aid. So the opposition isn't doing that. Other people following the monarchy's example are doing that. I went and volunteered at a temporary hospital, inspired by that example, to go and help out during this crisis. So he is setting a good example. The only bad example that he's allegedly setting are things supposedly from his private life that are unverified. As far as him naming his dog a general, he named his dog an air marshal, and it's the exact same thing that the Russians do. They name cats admirals in their navy. And I was a U.S. Marine before I woke up and started fighting American imperialism. They enlisted an English bulldog named Chesty, and he actually outranked me when I was a U.S. Marine. It's a mascot. And it's a harmless thing. It's a thing that everyone does, and the Western media, because they're targeting Thailand and trying to smear the monarchy, they try to spin something that's ordinary that everyone does and make it look sinister or bizarre or crazy. And so again, shame on you for reading the BBC or Reuters or Andrew McGregor Marshall and believing that nonsense. It's the exact same thing as if are we still holding our breath waiting for WMDs to turn up in Iraq? No. So we got to be smarter than that. Stop selectively believing things that you see. Yeah, he has no tattoos, but in the beginning, Andrew McGregor Marshall said those were real fresh tattoos, and he was wearing that bizarre shirt because he had fresh tattoos and he couldn't stand the pain of putting a proper shirt on. So it's just lies. They're lies, unverified photos. Why would anyone buy into that? And it's an irrelevant issue compared to public service to a country and what the king actually does on a daily basis for the Thai people. So again, it's a distraction, and I just don't understand why in 2021, after everything we've seen the West lie about, why we're still buying certain lies. Just makes no sense. So here the police are back in the intersection, and this is just going to be like this all evening into the night.
Just hide and seek, back and forth, just creating chaos, disruption. It tends to get more, smaller in the evening, but more violent. It's mainly petrol bombs, right, Brian?
Well, it's petrol bombs. They have explosives. The Western media and the opposition media say they're just firecrackers, but a couple of these have gone off in the hands of the protesters, and they have lost their hands. So they're not firecrackers. They're somewhere between a proper explosive and like a cherry bomb, something like that, somewhere in between there. And like I said, there was a camera inside of a car driving past one of these protests, and one of these bombs landed on the hood of their car and shattered their the explosion shattered their windshield. And they were on a road like this where you would be at some sort of speed. It's extremely dangerous. This is why the police cannot just allow them to run amok It's not really an IED. I guess technically it's an IED, but it's not like an IED that's going to flip a Humvee or anything. But it could blow off your hand. It's powerful enough to do that. It's powerful enough to crack a windshield or injure you. So I mean, it's obvious. It's not peaceful protesting. I think we could all agree on that. These explosives are beyond the realm of what would be considered a peaceful protest. Yes, repeating the Hong Kong riots again and again. Well, it's just because the Western media has a lot of influence. You know, they have the ability to repeat these lies over and over again, where even sensible people start buying into this. I'm pretty sure everyone here following me, and even some people who seem to be confused about the Thai monarchy, I'm pretty sure they're otherwise intelligent, honest people. They've just seen so many lies repeated so often, they take it as fact. It's like Tiananmen 1989. How many people, Angelo, that are probably more on our side than against us, but still believe the official narrative about 1989?
Can you imagine? Most of the youngsters, they believe that the Vietnam War was won by the U.S. In a few years from now, people will believe that Afghanistan was a success. This is how the media shape the perception. You know, there's a very good book by Noam Chomsky, Manufacturing Consent. You know, it's just you repeat enough times a lie, people start to believe it. You know, it's just inevitable. You know, it's just lies. And once in a while, they caught in a lie, and they say, okay, we were wrong. But the thing is that when you say 100 times a lie and then you tell the truth for one time, people will remember just the 100 times of lie. And it's sad, you know. I mean, in the future, imagine, I'm pretty much sure that they will make some movies about Afghanistan and say it was a success. What, 20 years of spending $2 trillion? What was a success? You were there to eradicate terrorism. Well, you know what? Probably the terrorist has never been so as strong as it is now. You know, you have created more terrorism, more terrorists that are actually going to back the whole narrative of the military-industrial complex. So U.S. citizens will keep on funding those useless wars. You know, and again, this is you know, Afghanistan is part of it, but you know, it's everywhere. Those fundings, they come in different forms. It funds terrorists, it funds NGOs, it funds political parties. It comes in different forms, and it's all in U.S. imperialist agenda of containing China. It's direct or indirect, and it comes in many forms. It comes in media. In the media, it's U.S. AGM is $1 billion on propaganda. Propaganda is just brainwashing people, you know, and Hollywood is another softer version. You know, because sadly, a lot of people, they learn about history through Hollywood. You know, I mean, 60 years later, most people in the West, they believe that the U.S. Saved the world in World War II, you know, which is not true. Russia did. I mean, Russia, who beat the Nazi, were Russians. So you see how perception are shaped by Hollywood, by the media. It's just because it's very unfair. They have deep pockets. How can you beat that? You know, I mean, you know, and if you are on social media, they even manipulate the algorithm, so we get limited exposure.
Absolutely. I see some people talking about Tank Man. I mean, it was a powerful image, the way it was deceptively posted, but those tanks were leaving Tiananmen Square, and it was just some lunatic standing in front of tanks. The Chinese tank drivers were so insistent on not running him over. I mean, it couldn't have been more of a telltale sign of what really happened at Tiananmen, a very reluctant Chinese military and an aggressive, almost completely insane opposition antagonize, like trying to walk under the tank. For what reason? They're leaving Tiananmen Square. What are you blocking the tank for? But this is just like Angelo just said, it's the power of the Western media and repeating these lies over and over again. Yeah, I saw someone else say the WikiLeaks, the U.S. State Department itself admitted the truth about Tiananmen Square. It wasn't me and Angelo making a compelling argument. We're just telling you what the U.S. government admitted themselves, that there was no bloodshed in Tiananmen Square, and that the protesters were murdering soldiers, and that the violence was at a minimum. There's two ways. It was a two-way clash. So, I mean, but that just goes to show you a lie like that can persist for so long. Angela, you were talking about Vietnam. As an American, I know a lot of Americans who say, well, we just weren't allowed. The military wasn't allowed to win the war. I don't know how they say that. The U.S. dropped so many bombs on Vietnam and Laos. I mean, there's more bombs. There's more unexploded cluster bombs in Laos right now than actual people. That's how badly the U.S. did everything except carpet bomb Vietnam with nuclear weapons. That's the only thing they didn't do. They just lost the war. They lost it. The Vietnamese people defended their country, and the U.S. lost. So that's the truth of it. And again, like you said, that is another lie that persists. So there's millions of Americans who actually believe that. It's unbelievable. And they're creating new lies today. There's people in the comment section mentioning some of the new lies. That North Korean girl, she's like the North Korean Greta Thunberg. You could tell she's coached, she's acting, she's reading lines, she's putting on a performance about her experience going from North Korea through China. And she actually manages to make China look even more horrible than the Western media tries to depict North Korea. It's unreal. And based on what actual evidence.
Her name is Yeonmi Park, right? So she gives speeches, gets lots of money.
Yes.
And actually, she's not interested in her lies. Before she passed with her father and mother, I think, and then later on, so he was a trader. He was a Chinese trader that helped her pass, but he raped a mother. But the thing is that the first version was not that. How can you give a first version and a second version you get raped? The same as those Uyghur activists. At the beginning, before they were saying a certain version, and at the end they come up with the tortures. Torture, rape, mass rape, and so on. I mean, how can you change your version over and over? I mean, we are not going to debunking. There are people that are doing a lot of work debunking that, especially, Daniel Dumbrill, Grey Zone. That would be a full-time job. The problem is that there are so many lies. If we are going to debunking, it's too much work, so the North Korea is the same. I personally I've been to North Korea. And people need to understand about the history of North Korea. Why North Korea is a hermit state, like completely closed? Because it was wiped out completely during the Korean War, and it's been completely under sanctions, and this is why they just don't want to open up, because they know what it means. They suffered so much. That's the problem. It's just it's not a black and white world. It's important to understand that the people are under sanctions or being attacked cannot even have reforms. Why do you think that Cuba is still closed and doesn't have reforms? Because it's constantly being attacked. If it was to open and do reforms and being more democratic, well, that would be an easy target. Sadly, the thing is that they want to promote democracy, but in reality, if you by opening up your country, you actually open the door to anti-democratic forces.
We've actually seen what happens to countries that open up to the U.S. I mean, we did a special on the Arab Spring and the groundwork laid before the Arab Spring in 2011, and how the U.S. lured Libya and Syria into complacency and a false sense of security getting them to kind of open up a little bit. And the first thing they did was bury a dagger into their spines. I see someone said about Tiananmen Square being a two-way clash. I agree that the evidence suggests that it was mostly the protesters who were carrying out the violence. I mean, like large-scale violence. They burned hundreds of armored vehicles, and they killed I don't know how many soldiers. And I don't know how many protesters were actually killed, but I well, just being realistic, I imagine that some were killed when certain armed soldiers came on the scene and they had no choice. I mean, what do you do when protesters are murdering other soldiers and destroying hundreds of vehicles? What do? You have to shoot them. I mean, what else are you going to do? They're killing people and destroying everything. You have to kill them. Especially back then in China, I don't think they had sophisticated riot control at that time, and the protesters, admittedly by the U.S. State Department's own accounts, seized a huge amount of Chinese army weapons. So I mean, like were they armed? Were they potentially armed when armed soldiers came? Because what happens in a lot of these countries is the army comes in to do riot control. They're not really well experienced at it. They're not sent in with loaded weapons, or sometimes no weapons at all. Sometimes they have weapons but no bullets. And so if the crowd overwhelms them, that's it for them. And then they have professional troops, career troops that come in with more experience, battle hardened in some cases, and they can come in if things get too far out of hand. I think that's what happened in Bangkok in 2010. And I think that might have been what happened at Tiananmen. But of course, it wasn't as if the Chinese government set out to go kill innocent, unarmed protesters. The protesters were clearly violent and killing people.
Yeah,
so I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that. I can't say it was two-way where the violence was equal on both sides. I just mean there was violence going both ways. But we could definitely have a conversation about how much from which side.
Yeah, and there was already meddling back then in Tiananmen Square, meddling by U.S. forces, the CIA. Well, remember, 4 weeks before Tiananmen Square, the U.S. appointed an ex-CIA agent as the U.S. ambassador to Beijing. So it tells you a lot. I mean, there was it was synchronized actions, and then you had already the CIA under the entity. I mean. Radio Free Asia, Voice of America, being very active for pushing for revolution in China. So already some meddling back then.
Okay, Angelo has to get going. I also have to get going, which is I mean, that's the nature of these live stream things. We're both real busy. Yeah. This is going to go on until like 11 p.m. We can't do like I don't even think YouTube will allow us to stream for that long, but I don't know. Maybe they will. But we both got to get going. The main takeaway here is that these are U.S.-backed protests. They're actively, eagerly committing violence against the police. You can see how the police are being very lenient on them. I mean, they're throwing bombs and petrol bombs at the police. And this is what goes on almost on a daily basis. And they're just trying to destabilize Thailand. This is part of a regional effort to destabilize Southeast Asia and deny it to China. So China and Asia as a whole cannot rise. And the US can maintain artificial primacy over the region and the planet. So anyway, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for all the comments and all the ideas and alternative ideas. It's all welcomed. Thank you very much. This will be online. We'll clean it up a little bit, maybe put a video description with some links, maybe, I don't know. And Angelo, again, thank you so much for staying with me extra long today, and with all your insight and expertise. Thank you so much. So until next time, bye for now.